Hey guys, tonight we begin a surprisingly soothing dive into boring history for sleep, what laundry was like in ancient Rome. Picture sparkling tunics drifting down the Tiber, clever wooden tongs plucking fresh linens, and steam rising like a gentle lullaby for tired minds. If this soft exploration of ancient washhouses resonates with your restful side, go ahead and hit like, and subscribe only if you truly enjoy the calm. Don't forget to share in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is on your clock, so we can feel our sleepy community grow around the globe. Now, dim the lights, switch on a whisper-soft fan, pull your blanket closer, and settle into your coziest nook. We're about to glide through sudsy rituals, dusty detergents, and the hush of riverside laundries in a warm, playful drift. Feel your shoulders melt, your breath slow, and anticipation gently unfold. Now the story begins. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and focus on the tale. Soon you will drift into restful slumber. The screen now fades to darkness. Before the first hint of dawn, before the sky has shifted from deepest indigo to the pale blush of morning, a small knot of fullers gathers at the weathered facade of the Phalanca. The street is silent. Only the far-off clatter of an early baker sliding wooden trays into a brick oven, and the faint, hollow echo of a lone shepherd's flute by the riverbank, remind them that the city beyond still stirs. Their breath hangs in gentle clouds beneath the low-hanging eaves, and in the grey hush it seems as though time itself slows. Each fuller carries a slender iron key at his belt, the metal cool against his waist and a promise of labor to come. Marcus, the eldest of the three, steps forward. His calloused fingers brush the worn wood of the doorframe, running along deep scratches left by decades of unlocking and relocking. A curved latch holds the heavy door firmly in place. With a subtle click that pierces the morning stillness, he slides the latch aside. The door groans, a long, slow protest from its massive oak panels, and swings inwards on iron hinges. A cloud of stale air, scented faintly of brine and old linen, drifts out. In that hush, the inside of the Phalanca feels almost sacred, low ceilings blackened by years of lamp smoke, walls lined with stone basins and sturdy wooden beams overhead. It is a place of ritual, not mere work. Quietly stepping inside, Marcus gestures for the others to follow. Gaius and Livia, each carrying a simple clay jar filled with scented oil, move to the far corner, where a row of iron hooks awaits. The lamps are already mounted on short iron brackets, half filled with olive oil. Carefully, as if tending small altars, they pour fresh oil into each lamp's reservoir. The golden liquid glints in the lantern light they have brought from home, and Gaius lifts a bit of twine cord, soaked in oil, to kindle the first flame. A small, steady glow spreads across the room, revealing shelves heaped with folded cloth, frayed sandals by the door, and a scattering of wooden paddles leaning against the wall. The shadowy outlines of basins, empty and waiting, form dark pools of promise in the half-light. Livia moves from lamp to lamp, a steady hand shielding the flame from a stray puff of wind that seeps through the cracks. The lamps sputter once, then settle into a soft, amber glow. Their light shivers across the rough stone floor, illuminating reddish veins in the marble thresholds and casting long, wavering silhouettes of the workers on the wide troughs. The air warms slightly around the lamps, and the scent of burning oil, sweet pear wood mingled with olive fat, lays a thin veil over the damp, earthy odor of the building itself. Broken tiles and small shards of lead lie about where repairs will soon be made. In this gentle illumination, the eye begins to discern the tools of the trade, heavy wooden mallets, goatskin brooms, parcels of chalk and fine clay, each one a silent instrument in the art of cleansing. Across the room, a row of wooden pegs holds the workers' outer garments, simple oilskins that protect tunic and toga from splashes of water and urine used in the cleaning process. Crisp bundles of striped fabric rest on a shelf beside them, cloth bound for later in the day, once the lamps give way to sunlight. Gaius, running a hand along the lowered hem of his own oilskin, selects a cloak of dark wool tightly woven to repel damp. He hangs it carefully, making sure the sleeves face out to dry the night dew that settled upon it. Livia follows suit, straightening the edge of her cloak, noting a thin line of mildew that must be scrubbed away in the next cycle. the temperature in the Phalonica remains cool, despite the lamps. Stones absorb the pre-dawn chill and radiate it back in soft waves. Gaius steps near the doorway, where a thin shaft of moonlight lingers on the threshold. He closes his eyes and gulps a breath of mist-sweet air, feeling the damp press against his lungs. From the street without come distant sounds, the tinkle of water drawn from a neighbor's fountain, the rough laughter of a watchman on his rounds, the faint thunder of hooves on cobbles as a lone rider makes his way toward the river district. Each sound anchors them to the wider world of Rome, though they remain hidden here in the quiet half-light. Marcus, standing at the largest basin, runs his palm along its stone edge. He notes the slight warp in the granite, evidence of centuries of water erosion, and carefully checks the small wooden dam at its outlet. It sits motionless, closed against the silence, yet already promises a steady flow when the pumps awaken after sunrise. He listens for the faint drip from a crack in the floor nearby. Tomorrow, he reminds himself, this fissure will be sealed with fresh mortar. For now, he exhales, feeling the calm before the labor. The stillness in the Phalonica is thick and rich, like the foam on a fine woolen rug that has yet to be trodden. Their lamps now cast a welcoming glow upon the Phalonica's interior, an intimate space where a single misplaced step could upset a bucket of brine or send the fine white clay spattering across the floor. It is here, in this pre-dawn hush, that the work of generations takes shape. One day, late at night, they will extinguish these lamps and bolt the doors once more, leaving the hearth dark and the air cold. But for now, the world beyond still sleeps. Within, the Fullers breathe easily, savoring the last moments of quiet before the first garments arrive, pressed and soiled from the city streets. In the soft lamplight, among peg and basin, among dripping walls and silent watchers, the Phalonica stands ready, an ancient stage awaiting the daily rhythm of cleansing that will restore cloth and reputation alike, weaving together the lives of those who call Rome home. The first pale tendrils of dawn still lingered beyond the walls of the Phalonica when Marcus lifted the wooden bucket to the rim of the moss-dark cistern. The air, heavy with the memory of last night's dew, clung to his tunic and brushed his skin with chill. A faint whisper of wind teased the oil lamps that still glowed low on their iron hooks, and in the half-light he could make out the concentric rings of algae on the stone. He gripped the strong hemp rope, looped it twice around his wrist, and slowly lowered the bucket. It slipped past thick pillars of shadow and reached the still surface of the water with scarcely a ripple. As he felt the rope slide through his fingers, Marcus inhaled deeply, tasting the dampness of the hour and hearing his own breath echo in the hush of the early house. The rope grew heavy in his hand with each turn of the winch, and he bent his knees to brace the weight. Near the surface, the bucket snagged on a ledge of limestone, and he nudged it gently to free it. Moments later, the pallid light revealed the taut, rope-bound vessel brimming with clear, cool liquid. Tiny bubbles clung to its sides like dewdrops on a leaf, and a pale sheen of moisture formed on his palm as he hauled it upward. At the threshold of the stairwell, Marcus paused. He raised the bucket high and tilted it back to inspect the clarity of the water. There was no hint of turbidity, no trace of earth's muddiness. It was a gift that had traveled unseen through clay pipes buried in the courtyard soil, drawn from the aqueduct beyond the city gates. He fingered the scalloped rim with quiet gratitude, then knelt before a small altar carved into the wall. 3 metal cups waited there, each marked with the modest relief of a household lar. With reverent care, Marcus poured a small libation into each cup. "Household lares," he murmured, so soft that only the quiet surfaces of stone and water bore witness. "Bless this cistern and grant us water as steadfast as your guardianship. May the flow remain pure, and may no drought enter this watercourse." He allowed himself a moment of silence, neither long nor brief, but sufficient to breathe a prayer into the enclosed air. Then he tipped the bucket slightly to empty these few sips at the statue's feet, the small offerings glinting like fragments of morning light on the altar's stone slab. Releasing the knot in the rope, Marcus set the bucket down beside him and studied the network of stone troughs that curved through the laundry chamber like pale serpents. Each basin, hewn from a single block of marble, formed an unbroken channel from one end of the room to the other. He approached the first trough, its surface stained green around the edges where water had sat too long, and knelt to dip his hand into the gentle current. Yes, the water flowed. He guided his fingers across the smooth bottom, feeling the stream's steady push. With careful calculation, Marcus reached for the pair of slender wooden dams placed nearby. These little planks, worn smooth by seasons of use, could be slid into the grooves carved at the channel's mouth. One by one, he raised them, balanced each across the narrow gap, and lowered them until they sat flush. A gentle swell of water pooled behind each barrier, awaiting release. He studied the rise of the surface and gauged the angle of inflow until the reservoirs beyond brimmed with measured precision. Here, at this moment between darkness and dawn, the Phylonica itself seemed to awaken. The low murmur of water, once hidden, now whispered through every basin. In the dim glow of the remaining lamps, the surfaces gleamed like pale marble ribbons threading the room. Tiny eddies formed at the corners, turning over chips of lime, and faint droplets leaped and fell in a soft, constant rhythm. Each small splash told of readiness, a readiness to receive tunics, to lift stains from wool, to set in motion the great machinery of cleansing. Marcus rose quietly and carried the water bucket to the next trough. He tipped it gently to fill the chamber's second arc, careful to avoid sudden surges that might undermine the dams. A few grains of sand, dragged in on the edge of his sandal, tumbled into the stream and drifted downward. He paused to pluck them free, mindful that each particle might scar the face of a fine garment later. All the while, he glanced toward the narrow entry through which Gaius, the foreman, would soon appear. In not much more than an hour's time, the men charged with harvesting the pungent alkali would begin their rounds, hauling amphorae of aged urine from the street jars. But for now, this watery undercurrent was the very heart of the Phylonica's life. Without it, there would be no soaking, no rinsing, no final brightening in sunlight. It was the silent pulse that set the tempo for every stage to follow. By the time Marcus returned to the first basin, the water had settled into a smooth sheet, a quiet offering of patience and promise. He rested his palm on the cool stone edge, feeling his own heartbeat slow in sympathy with the gentle movement beneath. In these first moments of light, there was no hurry. The world beyond the Phylonica's walls, its markets, its clattering carts, its shouting peddlers, remained muted, still steeped in dawn. Here, within the laundry house, the only sound was this measured breathing of water, rising and falling like the tide of a distant sea. He stood, wiped his hands on the hem of his tunic, and surveyed the entire channel network. One final adjustment, he decided, a slight tilt of the last wooden dam to quicken the trickle into the adjoining cistern below. This would reserve a gentle overflow that could be diverted to the wash pits when the time came. He nudged the dam with his foot and watched as the water level shifted, a brief, subtle surge that rippled through the system. Satisfied, he stepped back. The Phylonica was now ready. In this softened hush of morning, the stone troughs awaited the weight of sodden cloth, the steady hand of the fuller, and the labor to come. Marcus lowered the bucket once more, letting the rope carry it quietly into the dark well, a final gesture of completion. Then, as the first hints of rosy light crept over rooftops beyond the courtyard, he rose and moved toward the heavy wooden door through which his comrades would soon emerge. In the moments before Gaius's shout would stir the men from slumber, Marcus paused at the threshold. Behind him, the stone chambers stood primed, the calm waters at rest. Ahead, the day's work beckoned, harvesting the ancient alkali, softening fibers, stamping grime from cloth. But for this instant, he simply inhaled the cool, damp air, tasted the faint scent of wet stone, and felt the promise of a new cycle, another day in the Phylonica, another chapter of cleansing, bound by water's steady, enduring flow. A low chorus of dripping water echoes through the Phylonica as the first light of morning seeps between narrow slits in the plastered wall. The basins stand ready beside the troughs that now brim with clear, cool water, drawn from the cistern at earlier dawn. But water alone cannot banish the ingrained stains of grease and soil from tunics and togas. For that, the fullers prepare their true cleansing agent, aged human urine, rich in ammonia and alkali, stored overnight in street jars and amphorae. In this chapter, the labor of collection and preparation unfolds in measured, deliberate motion. A stout fuller rolls open the wooden shutter to the front courtyard, revealing a row of large, olive-colored earthenware jars tethered by hemp ropes. Each jar carries the faint residue of the previous day's gathering, liquid yellow-brown, thick with the promise of cleaning power. The pungent odor hangs low, mingling with the tang of limestone walls and the faint incense from a neighbor's chapel. A second fuller steps forward, hefting a laden amphora by its curved handles. He tests its weight, muscles coiling beneath his tunic, before lifting it clear of the dais. As he pivots, the earthen vessel rattles against plaster, a tiny stream drips onto the flagstones, and a sharp, acrid scent cuts the morning air. They move in unison, 2 by 2, careful to keep each amphora upright. Their sandals, worn smooth by years of treading vats, scrape softly on the cushion of straw strewn across the threshold. Aware of the risk of spillage, the fullers incline their bodies forward, centering the heavy load over strong shoulders. Beneath their feet, stray fragments of olive pits crackle, a reminder of the nearby presses where oil is made. Each step is slow and deliberate, as though the weight of every amphora carries not only liquid but the reputation of their craft. Within the vaulted washing chamber stands a broad lead-lined vat, its outer face darkened by age and mineral deposits. A gleam of early sun touches the metal rim, highlighting faint streaks where water has run off and left pale trails. With practiced care, one fuller sets down the first amphora on a low stool and unclasps the stout cord bound around its neck. A measured tilt, and the syrupy stream of aged urine flows, hissing faintly as it meets the cooler air. The fullers lean close, noses wrinkling against the acrid stench, while the liquid pools in a shallow corner of the vat, forming bubbles at the edges. As each amphora empties, the mix grows deeper and more opaque. The earliest jars yield a milder brew, paler, more translucent, while the oldest amphorae deliver a darker, almost amber-brown current, heavy with sediment. One fuller uses a small ladle to scoop away excess dregs, easing them aside into a clay bowl. He tests the depth of foam with a fingertip, observing how readily it breaks and returns. A glance from the foreman, a silent cue, confirms that the mixture is strong enough. They will only add water later, once the alkali concentration has been judged by sight and touch. Reaching for a long, straight paddle carved from olive wood, the fuller begins to stir. The wooden shaft dips into the liquid, and each wide, deliberate pull sets the mixture swirling around the vat's circumference. Soft clinks of stone against metal mark the paddle's rhythm as the sediments disperse in fine clouds. Tiny air pockets rise in lazy spirals and burst at the surface, their silent popping accentuated by the distant thrum of the water wheel. Every turn of the paddle draws in new pockets of alkali, ensuring even potency throughout the bath. Momentarily, both fullers step back, inhaling the pungent bouquet. It is a heady, all-encompassing odor, equal parts ammonia and ancient warmth, the very essence of this hushed laboratory of cloth. They steady themselves against the sharp tang, reminding their lungs to breathe narrowly through slightly parted lips. Already they can sense the shift in air, the cleansing power dormant within the vat begins to rise, like a promise of whiteness to come. One of the fullers murmurs a quiet invocation to Minerva, goddess of crafts, asking her to bless the forthcoming labor. Though the practice is crude, culling human waste for alkali, the result will be vibrant fabrics, fit for the wealthy patricians who prize a spotless toga above all. Even as he speaks, a stray drop slips from the paddle back into the swirling bath, releasing a small plume of bubbles. He watches the moment, amber meets silver foam, and a faint hiss whispers of transformation about to occur. They proceed to adjust the fire beneath the vat, just enough to give the mixture a gentle warmth, never more, for excessive heat would degrade the alkali. The Phalonica's earthen floors steady the heavy hearthstones, and wisps of smoke drift upward, lost in the vaulted ceiling. As the early sun climbs higher, its rays find their way through the narrow clerestory windows, striking the lead-washed walls and catching the steam that curls from the vat's surface. The mixture glistens, alive with potential. At last, the preparation is complete. The fullers lower a shallow wooden dipper into the vat, lifting it quickly. A single drop flickers midair before falling back. The consistency is perfect, neither too harsh to eat away at woven fibers, nor too weak to loosen the grease they seek to banish. A satisfied nod passes between the two men. Together, they wipe the paddle clean, resting it against the vat's rim. The murky bath sits ready, awaiting the first handful of woolen tunics that will sink beneath its depths in the next chapter. With the work finished, they return the empty amphorae to their designated corner, rinsing each vessel with a stream of fresh water from the adjacent trough. The cool liquid clatters against the curved interior, sending echoes across the stone floor. Even in this moment of calm, the air remains laced with the pungent promise of alkaline cleansing. Yet for these fullers, hardened by early mornings and the sharp tang of ammonia, it is a familiar, almost comforting ritual. As they move on to the next stage, the vat stands at the center of the room, brimming with power ready to soften, lift, and renew the cloth that passes through skilled hands. Thus concludes the harvest of urine for alkali, setting the stage for the deep soaking and careful softening to follow. Before the first rays of sun have climbed above the tiled rooftops, the Pholonica's inner chambers are already alive with motion. A gentle warmth spreads through the vaulted hall where the lead-lined vats stand like silent sentinels, waiting to receive their burden of wool and linen. The ambient hush is rarely broken by more than the drip of water or the faint creak of timber as the support beams settle in the cool morning air. In this stillness, the next step of the cleansing ritual begins, the careful immersion of delicate garments into the pungent alkali bath. You approach the nearest vat, your leather-soled sandals soundless on the stone floor. In one hand you carry a wooden paddle, but for now it rests against your shoulder, its length worn smooth by countless stirrings of the brackish brew. Before you, an attendant drapes a folded stack of dyed tunics and woolen mantles along the edge of the vat. Each garment is patterned or plain, heavy with traces of body oils, dust, and the faintest stains picked up on distant roads or from the marketplace. With deliberate reverence, you grasp the hem of the first tunic. The wool feels stiff and cool under your fingers, the fibers still firm from yesterday's drying. You draw it back momentarily, inspecting the weave. The threads appear tight-knit but universally dulled by repeated wear. Then, with a measured breath, you begin to lower the garment into the murky liquid. The bath itself is a cloudy amber, the sediment of chalk and clay resting in suspension. You release the cloth so that it drifts downward, sinking on its own weight once it meets the fluid's embrace. As the material descends, bubbles of trapped air rise to the surface with a soft fizz. The moment the fibers touch the alkali, you sense a faint lift, strings of lint begin to separate, freed by the chemical caress. A gentle hiss rises from the vat, as though the mixture welcomes the fabric's presence. One by one, each article of clothing follows, an undyed tunic, then a striped cloak, and finally a silk sash reserved for gentler treatment elsewhere. For the heavier woolens, you adjust your grip so that the garment will not snag on the vat's lip. The folds glide beneath the surface, smoothing out as if guided by invisible hands. When the pile is fully submerged, it fans across the vat's bottom like a fleet of tiny sails. You pause to mark the hour by the turning of the watermill wheel above. In the moments since dawn, the wheel has made just under a quarter revolution. The trickle of water powering it slips down stone channels outside, but here you feel its presence in the steady drip-drip along the walls. Tradition holds that the fabrics should rest for 3 full turns of that great wheel before they are disturbed again. This interval allows the alkali to penetrate the fibers fully, softening rough patches and loosening the embedded grease that no water alone could shift. During this period of waiting, you do not stand idle. Instead, you draw a slender wooden skimmer from its peg and begin to sweep the surface of the bath. Tiny fragments of wool and stray threads drift on top, white and pale like motes of dust. With each pass of the skimmer, you collect a small clump of lint and carry it to a shallow bowl at your side. The debris gathers there, a testament to the effectiveness of this preliminary steep. Behind you, another fuller works at a neighboring vat, humming a low chant as he tends to his own, and the sound is oddly soothing. As you skim, you notice how the fragrance of the room shifts. The initial pungency of aged urine softens into something earthier, a mineral note, reminiscent of crushed chalk and damp earth. The aroma is not pleasant in isolation, but here it feels functional, a badge of labor and utility. Beyond the vat, you catch the muted rumble of carts on the cobblestones, the distant murmur of a baker opening his shutters, and occasionally the cry of a market hawker preparing for the day's bustle. Inside the Phalonica, these sounds become part of a calm orchestra, background to the ritual you and your fellows have repeated since boyhood. After the first full turn of the mill wheel, you dip your paddle into the vat and lift a small fold of cloth. The fabric yields under the gentle pressure, smoother than before but still bearing the weight of impurities. You stir the mixture with slow, circular strokes, never too vigorous, for a rough motion could felt the fibers and harden them instead of softening. The lead lining mutes the violence of the reaction, ensuring a steady exchange between cloth and alkali. The second revolution passes with little fanfare. You continue skimming and stirring, mindful of the minute changes in texture. Occasionally you draw a residue from the bottom of the vat to check for grit. If you spot a pebble or a pin, sometimes lost from garments in use, you carefully fish it out before it can scratch the cloth. The skimming bowl grows heavy with lint, and you empty it into a larger container destined for the corner of the courtyard, where the scraps will be dried and later sold as tinder or mixed into mortar. Nothing goes to waste here. By the third turn of the wheel, the transformation is evident. The wool cloaks shimmer faintly with the sheen of freed oils, and the linen tunics feel pliant to the touch. You lift one of the heavier pieces, letting excess liquid drip off until only a steady stream remains. The cloth drapes over your arm in soft waves. You inhale close to the fibers and detect a subtle but welcome scent of earth rather than the earlier acrid note. In these moments, the labor feels less about brute force and more like alchemy, an exchange of properties that leaves both vessel and garment altered in small but meaningful ways. With a decisive movement, you reach for the iron hook resting by your side. You slip it beneath the submerged bundle and like a fisherman hauling in his catch, you draw the fabrics to the lip of the vat. A match of gentle heaves lifts each piece to the surface, and you deposit them onto a clean linen pallet set atop nearby trays. The sodden garments lie in neat piles, ready for the next phase, the rhythmic stomping in the shallow treading vats. But before shifting to that task, you pause for a moment of reflection. The morning light now filters in through high windows, tracing golden arcs across the stone floor. Dust motes float lazily through the beams, and the air carries a hint of warmth as the city stirs. In this quiet interval, you feel connected to every fuller who has stood at this same vat over the centuries, each one sensing, as you do now, that beneath the humble chore of laundry lies a deeper rhythm, the steady pulse of water, the turning of wheels, and the human hands that guide cloth through these ancient rituals. When you finally step back from the vat, the buckets are already primed at the cistern to refill the channels for rinsing. The next chapter awaits, where water's clarity will chase away the last traces of alkali and earth. But here, in the subdued glow of the Phalonica's morning, you breathe in the moment, a moment shaped by centuries of tradition, as the fabric of daily life is softened and renewed, ready once more to be pressed, bleached, and carried back into the world beyond these stone walls. Before the first pale light of dawn has fully given way to morning, the fullers stand poised at the edges of the shallow cleansing vats, muscles still warmed from the gentle rigors of soaking the linen and woolen robes. The air is cool, pungent with the faint trace of stale urine long ago collected from street urns and stirred into an alkaline bath. Lamps set into brackets along the stone walls cast amber pools of light in the dim interior, revealing ripples in murky water and the folded textiles waiting to be pressed. Each garment bears the faint imprint of rough fibers now loosened by hours of soaking, ready for the next, more vigorous ritual that will free them from the last lingering soils of the city's grime. A tall fuller named Gaius steps into the vat first, his caligy, leather sandals laced high across his ankles, squeaking softly as they settle on the uneven stone floor. He shifts his weight deliberately, bending each knee in turn so that the fabric beneath his feet yields in a slow, patient rhythm. Beneath the water, threads of coarse linen and softer wool twist and flex under Gaius's soles, releasing tiny bubbles of trapped air. He begins to stamp in measured cadence, down, up, down, up. The motion is unhurried, almost meditative. With every downward press, grease and residual oils are dislodged. With every lift of the heel, damp cloth lifts and falls anew, allowing fresh contact with the cleansing liquid. The sound is almost musical, a gentle splash echoing in the vaulted stone hall, punctuated by the low, measured creak of leather as his foot flexes. Nearby, Lucilla, another fuller, stands in the adjacent vat, performing the same ritual. She turns her head slightly, faintly amused at the sight of Gaius's concentrated expression, lines of care and purpose etched across his brow. She raises her voice just enough to be heard over the soft cadence. "Your rhythm today, Gaius, matches the turning of the millstone," she remarks quietly. "Perhaps you should teach the watermill a thing or two about consistency." Gaius grants her a half-smile but does not break his pattern. "Better that the mill grinds barley than has barley ground underfoot," he replies. His tone carries no offense, rather, it acknowledges the slow comedy of this shared toil. Both fullers are experts in this craft, each step calculated to maximize agitation without shredding delicate fibers. They are not strangers to the odor, sharp, sour, unmistakably the price they pay for white togas fit to wear in the forum, but they take pride in the transformation they enact. After several minutes, Gaius steps out of the vat, placing his sandals carefully on a low wooden bench to drain. He shakes his legs once, droplets of turbid liquid dancing away in tiny arcs. Beneath him, he sees the fabrics coiled and heavy, transformed from stiff, oil-laden threads into pliant mats of cloth ready for inspection. He moves to a small table set just beyond the vats and retrieves a fresh swatch of linen. The piece is smaller than a tunic panel, perhaps a remnant from trimming deftly saved for just this test. Gaius presses it between his palms, feeling its damp weight, and then brings it up to his nose. The scent of alkaline rise and a faint trace of botanical oil used in the prior day's rinsing lingers on the cloth. He lays the swatch against the side of the table, smoothed flat. With practiced fingers, he pinches the edge of the weave and gives it a hopeful tug. The threads yield easily, with no stubborn knots or lingering grit. He holds the cloth up to the lamp's light, searching for the slightest shadow or dull patch that might betray a stain still clinging stubbornly. Not a single filth fleck mars its surface, yet he is not satisfied. Passing the swatch to Lucilla, he nods for her appraisal. She inspects it under the lamp's glow, her keen eyes tracing every thread. "Excellent," she says softly. "The color is more vibrant, and the weave feels as if new spun." She adjusts the lamp's wick to heighten the flame, then examines the front and back. At last, she smiles, handing the swatch back. "This cloth may proceed to rinsing." But another piece there, she nods toward the vat where Gaius took his sample, requires another turn. "I see a faint gray line at the fold." Gaius nods again, patient and unfazed. He returns to the vat and steps in, this time shifting his stomping pattern by angling his foot to target the stubborn fold. His leather sandal presses firmly at the center of the garment, breaking up compacted fibers and nudging hidden impurities loose. The motion is gentle yet purposeful, heel to toe heel, over and over, until the water becomes slightly more opaque. Each circuit of his foot is a ritual, a guarantee that the cloth will emerge unblemished, white enough to satisfy the discerning eyes of a senator or a patrician matron. As he works, Gaius's thoughts drift to the longer day ahead. After this step, the fabrics will pass to the channels of fresh water that continually flow through the phalanca, carrying away the alkaline bath and fluffing the fibers in a cool cascade. Then will come the inspection by torchlight, the dusting with chalk and fuller's earth, and the final beating on smooth Lemnian stones. He anticipates the midday rest, when he will sit on a low bench, break bread with olives and goat cheese, and savor the moment of peace before resuming the day's labors. Yet for now, he focuses on the rhythm beneath his feet. The steady stamp has a quiet power, a certainty that even the most soiled cloak can be reborn. The leather of his sandals creaks and flexes, the water laps against the vat's lip, and the lamps burn slow and steady. Outside, beyond the heavy wooden doors, the streets begin to awaken, merchants lighting their stalls, laborers hauling grain, the faint clatter of cartwheels on the cobbles. But here, within the vaulted walls of the Phalanca, time seems measured by the heartbeat of the fuller's tread. After a final dozen presses, Gaius stops. He stands still, allowing the vestiges of motion to settle in his calves. With a swift movement, he lifts the cloth from beneath his sandal, shakes it in the air twice, and drapes it carefully over a wooden peg. The fabric glistens in the lamplight, each fiber plump and upright. He steps down and rubs his foot along the bench, then rubs his hands together before heavily lifting his sandals, now darkened by the base of soaked fibers. Lucilla steps forward, touching the cloth softly with a forefinger. "Well done," she murmurs. She measures the piece by folding it twice, then slips it into a low stone basin at her side filled with clear water diverted from the cistern. As the garment submerges, tiny bubbles rise and burst, bearing away any last hint of alkali. She lifts it once more, wrings it in controlled twists, and lays it to drip along another peg by the racks. Gaius breathes in the humid, lamp-scented air and allows himself a moment to lean against the wall. Sweat beads on his forehead, and his tunic clings to his back, but he feels a quiet satisfaction. In these simple, tireless motions, stamping, testing, adjusting, lies the ancient alchemy of the fuller's art. Once the sun climbs higher, these hands will fold and sort the fabrics, charge them with white earth and chalk, and prepare them for the final rituals of shining whiteness. But for this instant, the only task is the tread of leather on cloth, the pulse of water underfoot, and the softly echoing promise that every stain can be wrested free through patience and repetition. Thus concludes Chapter 5. The fabrics have been trampled clean, prepared for their journey through flowing channels, torchlit inspection, and a series of steps that will restore them to bright, spotless garments for Rome's citizens. In each measured stomp, the fullers honor a tradition older than the empire itself, weaving together labor and skill to transform the sullied into the immaculate. And in the quiet hush of the Phalanca's interior, the world outside may rage and bustle, but here, time slows to the simple cadence of fabric beneath leather soles, and the silent, steadfast art of cleansing continues. Under the pale morning light that filters through the high, narrow window slits of the Phalanca's main hall, the scent of wet wool and limestone lingers like a memory of last night's rain. Having completed the slow, measured stomping in the alkaline vats, the fullers pause, heads bent in concentration, to lift the sodden folds of cloth from the crowded lead-lined tubs. Their leather sandals slap softly against the worn flagstones as they bear heavy bundles of rinsed garments toward the east wall, where a narrow stone channel carries a steady stream of fresh water through the laundry house. In this moment, as the sun climbs higher and the lamps flicker low, the air holds a hushed promise of transformation, of garments once grayed with grease made bright again under the ever-flowing Roman aqueduct water. A sturdy fuller, Lucius by name, eases a trembling heap of woolen tunics onto the low ledge beside the channel. Drops of amber-hued liquid drip from the fabric's folds, clinking like tiny bells against the stonework. He places one hand on the deep sill for balance and with the other carefully grasps the edge of a heavy cloak, turning it so that the thick cloth fans open like a wing. Slowly, as if cradling the daylight itself, he lowers the cloak edge into the clear, rippling flow. The water welcomes the cloth's embrace, curling around fibers, soothing away the harsh bite of alkali. A hush falls over the workshop as co-workers stand back, watching the first sheet of rinsed wool drift beneath the surface before emerging pure and soft, its bristly curls now gentle to the touch. Nearby, Claudia, a younger assistant, crouches at the channel's side to clear small stones and stray twigs that have wandered in from the open grate above. She sweeps with a slender reed, the soft rasp of the stalk sliding across the stone's carved channel echoing faintly in the corridor beyond. Every pebble removed means fewer rough spots where a delicate tunic might snag. She pauses occasionally to dip her hand into the current, feeling its temperature, a hint of dawn's coolness still clinging to the water, yet warmed by midday heat trapped in the courtyard beyond the shuttered doorway. She flicks her wrist, sending a thin spray upward that catches the sunbeam cutting through a window slit, scattering rainbow prisms flickering across the damp wall. One by one, the damp raiments arrive, linen tunics wrinkled and pliant, woolen cloaks whose nap ripples as though stirred by an unseen breeze, goat hair capes heavy with the residue of countless nights under the stars. Each piece is methodically submerged, swirled beneath the flowing current by skilled hands. Two assistants work side by side, their movements synchronized as a quiet ritual: scoop, dip, swirl, lift. They watch as sudsy streaks dissolve into the shifting stream, trailing away to join the slow murmur that runs beneath their palms. Tiny bubbles, remnants of the earth and urine wash, cling to the cloth, then vanish into the onward surge, fueling the rhythm of cleansing. As the garments find repose on a ledge upstream, another fuller, Tertius, stands ready with a bundle of coarser fabrics. He leans forward, careful not to disturb the still-rinsed wares before him, and dips the old wool blanket into the channel. Its rough weave releases a cloud of pale fibers that drift downward before settling among the riverbed's pebbles. He traces the cloth's edge against the current, his forearms slick with water. Each sweep of cloth is a question: has the stubborn yellowish stain at the hem been purged? He leans closer to judge, the waterline flashing across his calloused knuckles. Satisfied, he lifts the blanket gently, letting excess water run back into the channel before setting it aside to be inspected by torchlight later. All the while, the stone gutter carries away remnants of lime, chalk, and clay from earlier applications of Foulin's earth. A faint whisper arises as the purified water flows under a low arch and out through an open grate at the back wall. Beyond, it tumbles into the cloacae beneath the street, destined to nourish the garden of a wealthy patron or irrigate roadside plains. Yet for now, the Phalonika's Bay remains a place of stilled breath and intense focus, a quiet alcove carved from the city's constant bustle. The only sound louder than cloth in current is the distant clatter of carts upon the cobbled street and the faint chant of a beggar echoing down the alley. At intervals, the master fuller, Gaius, moves among the group, inspecting each piece. By daylight's glow, he examines the clarity of the flowing water, searching for floating scum or the telltale swirl of clay that might cling to a stubborn crease. Whenever he spies an impurity, be it a pebble, a twig, or a stray wisp of wool, he kneels to clear it away, mindful that even the smallest particle could mar the finish of a prized toga or stola. His eyelids narrow as he tests the stream's strength, nudging the diminutive wooden dam upstream to boost the current's flow ever so slightly. The water responds with a brighter rush, as though awakened by his careful guidance. Behind him, the new apprentice, Jovinnes, approaches with a wooden bucket. He pauses at the channel's lip, doubting his own confidence, then dips the bucket deep into the water. He notices how the cool liquid spills over the rim, filling the vessel to the brim before he lifts it away. He pours its contents into a shallow trough set to collect clear rinse water for reuse when starching later in the week. He wonders at the industry of the Phallonica, how every drop is valued, how the cycle of cleansing continues without waste, sustained by careful hands and watchful eyes. The scene unfolds for him as both a lesson and a covenant: nothing here is squandered, nothing left to chance. As the hours drift by, the channel's basin fills slowly with a mosaic of damp cloth and bright water. Each piece rests in silent tribute to the fuller's craft, the current a living instrument that breathes renewal into every fiber. When entire batches lie cleansed upon the side, the fullers begin to carry them back toward the inspection benches illuminated by oil lamps. Yet before that next stage can commence, they pause for a final moment at the channel. They stand shoulder to shoulder, leaning on the carved stone as though gazing upon some sacred font. A hush settles over them, an unspoken agreement that this act of rinsing is the bridge between toil and triumph, between the murk of washing vats and the scrutiny of torchlit inspection. In this tranquil interval, the world beyond the Phallonica seems to pause. The clamor of merchants in the forum, the clatter of hooves on marble, even the distant peal of bells atop the temple of Vesta, all recede beneath the measured heartbeat of flowing water. The fullers exchange nods, silent acknowledgments of work well begun, and then, gathering their bundles of now sparkling cloth, they step away from the channel. Behind them, the stream continues its endless passage, carrying with it the promise of garments reborn, soft, clean, and ready to emerge under the flicker of flame and the careful eye of the master fuller in the hours to come. Thus, through patience and precise ritual, the ancient art of rinsing in flowing channels lays the foundation for the next stage of transformation, guiding the textiles from the realm of cleansing waters toward the reflective glow of torchlit inspection waiting just beyond. A low glow from burning oil lamps filled the narrow inspection chamber with a honeyed warmth, softening the sharp angles of its stone walls. The fullers, their sandals echoing gently on the flagstones, carried the last sodden bundles from the rinsing channels and laid them one by one upon the long, worn wooden table at the room's center. Though daylight still sifted through a small grated window high in the far wall, the lanterns, half a dozen shallow bronze bowls filled with olive oil, were lit now, for only by lamplight could even the faintest blemishes be revealed in the fibers. The air was humid, carrying the mingled scents of wet wool, drifting chalk dust from earlier dustings, and the distinct whisper of salt and soap trapped between linen threads. Their hands, damp and firm, smoothed the heavy cloak across the table's broad surface. The cloak, once a soldier's mantle, was now a pale shadow of its former hue after the alkaline baths and the rinsing torrents. Still, in this half-light, faint rings of discoloration lurked where blood or sweat had seeped deep into the weave. One by one, each fuller bent with careful deliberation, fingers gliding over the rippling folds, lifting the oil lamp closer, its wavering flame dancing across the cloth. They sought the slightest shift in shade, the merest telltale trace of a stain that might survive one final treatment, or a tiny abrasion in the wool's nap that destined the garment for repair. The first light struck the fabric at an angle, and a near-invisible halo appeared around the fold. The fuller paused, the lamp held steadily in one hand, as if the flame itself had become a delicate brush revealing hidden flaws. From their pocket, they drew a small stylus, its slender bronze tip made for scratching fine lines, and uncapped a wax tablet bound in rawhide. With measured strokes, they recorded the cloak's name, Marcus Flavius, military cloak, spot on lower hem. Each letter pressed into the wax left a clear indentation, testament to the care taken in this hour of scrutiny. Behind them, another fuller spread a shift of fine linen, its threads already pale and almost lifeless in the dim light. Yet where the lamp gleamed brightest, a ghostly yellowing emerged at the neckline, the remnant of a wine spill carelessly blotted but never fully erased. The worker murmured softly to a colleague, in a low voice that matched the room's tranquil rhythm, "This one will ask for chalk and earth, 5 drummed rounds of each." A nod confirmed the estimate, and with a swift flick, a new line in the ledger took shape. The muted chorus of lamp wicks hissing in their puddles of oil blended with the occasional drip of water from an open spout at the far end of the chamber. Each drip punctuated the hush, as though time itself moved more slowly here. In these pauses, the fullers attuned themselves to subtler details, the way a warped thread might fray, the stiffening of linen from a stubborn stain, or the glint of a repair already begun but not yet complete. The stylus scratched and tapped, marking each flaw and noting remedial steps, chalk application, earth rubbing, final beating on marble slabs yet to come. As one worker scanned a smear of olive oil used earlier to polish a woolen hem, he reflected on the alchemy of this craft. The same earth that had once cleansed the garments must now be applied again, restoring each fiber to its original brightness. His thoughts drifted to the sacks of fuller's earth resting beyond the antechamber, to the fine limestone chalk carefully sifted in woven baskets. Soon, each cloth would bear a light white dusting, absorbing the last traces of oil and stain, and then be bruised upon smooth stones until every imperfection surrendered. In the lantern glow, shadows lengthened and contracted. A slender beam outlined a pair of wool trousers, revealing a faint smudge invisible in daylight but stark under lamplight scrutiny. The fuller drew a gentle breath before inscribing Titus Sempronius, leg seam, chalk and earth. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, imagining the final whiteness of the linen that would emerge in the next hour. Before him lay the promise of transformation, stains banished, fibers brightened, garments reborn for eager clients to don in the morning sun. Once the final piece had been logged and the wax tablets closed, the fullers set down their lamps and surveyed the table as if it were an artist's palette. There, in neat rows, lay tunics, cloaks, and undergarments, each marked in the ledger for its particular treatment. The gentle warmth of the lamps accentuated the soft folds and textures of the textiles, and for a moment, the room felt suspended between the world of work and the hush before dawn. Every garment told a story: the wife who had spilled berry juice on a white shift, the trader whose wool cloak carried the dust of desert sands, the young soldier whose uniform bore traces of campfire smoke. A soft murmur passed around the table as hands reached for gathered brushes of goat's hair, prepared earlier for spreading chalk. Each fuller selected a brush, shaking it when the chalk dust settled too deeply into its bristles. Now came the ritual of brightening, gentle strokes across linen collars and tunic sleeves, dust rising like fine mist in the lamplight. Beneath the dust lay both the hope of cleanliness and the care of a craft passed from father to son. Even in this half-light, they honored the tradition, holding fast to the knowledge of clay and chalk, of water and flame. The ledger was set aside, the wax tablet stacked in a small bronze basin, and the stylus returned to its leather sheath. Soon, the chamber would fall quiet, for this inspection marked the culmination of the washing cycle and the threshold of the next phase. Outside, the first pale promise of dawn stirred behind the walls, but within these stones, the world of cloth and labor remained lit by gentle flame and the patient hands that coaxed each garment to new life. As they gathered their brushes and prepared to move the fabrics toward the antechamber, where sacks of white earth and chalk waited, the fullers shared one last glance across the inspection table. In that look lay pride in a job well done and readiness for the filings of earth that would finalize their work. The slow cadence of the day continued, unhurried and exacting, carrying them forward into Chapter 8, where powdered earth and chalk would transform the washed fabrics into garments of bright clarity, ready once more to honor Rome's endless rhythms. The cavernous space of the Phalanca still holds the muted glow of a few oil lamps when the workers gather their implements for the next stage of the cleansing ritual. By this hour, the lanterns cast quivering pools of light across the rough-hewn stone floor, their flames muted by the residual breeze that drifts through the open doorway. The clang of wooden shovels against ceramic jars, echoes of the day's earlier tasks, has given way to a hushed expectancy. After the torchlit inspection in Chapter 7, each garment marked for further brightening now awaits the delicate alchemy of powders, fuller's earth and chalk, the time-honored agents of absorption and whitening. At one end of the main hall stands a stout wooden table grooved by centuries of wear. Upon it rest shallow bowls heaped with fine white chalk, known to the Romans as creta levigata, and larger, coarser piles of pale brown earth called terra phallanica. Both arrive by cart from distant quarries and clay beds, chalk from the limestone cliffs near Italy's eastern shores, fuller's earth from alluvial deposits around Capua and Etruria. The foreman, Lucius, shakes out his woolen tunic and ties a simple leather strap around his waist to secure a pouch of stylus and small wax tablets. "Let us begin," he intones softly, his voice measured against the low hum of labor. Each fuller selects a garment, laying it flat on the broad surface of the table. First, a linen tunic, its fibers still damp from the previous rinsing in flowing channels. Next, a mantle of silk tinted in a pale rose, fragile, demanding care. They group the textiles by fabric and hue, for the chalk will brighten linen and cotton most effectively, while the more absorbent terra phallanica will lift remaining oils from wool and coarse hemp with greater subtlety. Over the linen, a younger worker, Tertius, lifts a handful of chalk with slender wooden tongs. The powder drifts down like the finest of snows, settling in an even veil across the entire surface. Beneath the lamp's glow, the chalk gleams white as fresh fallen frost. Tertius pauses to tap the side of the bowl with the back of the tongs, releasing a soft, dry tinkle that mingles with the distant murmur of voices beyond the door. Then, kneeling, he takes up a goat hair broom, its bristles trimmed short for precision, and sweeps upward strokes, coaxing the chalk deeper into the weave of the cloth. Each pass of the broom raises a little white cloud that drifts momentarily in the air before settling on the cool stone. Nearby, Marcia, one of the few women working this late, attends to a woolen cloak. She dips the broom into a shallow bowl of fuller's earth, lifting a powdered clump that scatters into a gentle puff. The clay's hue is an earthy ochre, almost honeyed, and carries a damp faintness of the fields from which it was quarried. Marcia presses the broom hard into the fibers, working in tight circles. The bristles fan out, forcing the clay to embed itself around every thread. In her careful eyes lies the memory of earlier steps, the scouring in the alkaline baths, the rhythmic stomping that loosens stubborn grime, the patient rinsing under rushing water. Now her movements are slower yet more deliberate, as if she is coaxing the garments toward a final state of purity. The air grows thick with dust. A faint mustiness mingles with smoky lamp oil, and every breath carries the bracing bite of chalk. Occasionally a fuller lifts a cloth to the light, peering through its fibers to gauge how the powders have been absorbed. Where oil still peeks through the weave, slight yellowish patches, extra chalk or clay is applied until the fabric looks uniformly pale. Some workers hum softly, others exchange whispered tips, too much chalk, and the linen may crack when beaten. Use temperate strokes on silk, lest you strip the nap of its sheen. Their voices ripple through the workshop like distant birdsong at dawn. Once the dusting and gentle rubbing are complete, the garments are folded with a ritual care. Linens are rolled into compact cylinders, cloaks are draped over clean wooden pegs. Each bundle carries its label, a small tablet tied by wax twine, inscribed with the client's name, the number of garments, and a tally of the powder used. Behind them, the piles on the table grow smaller, each pile inching closer to tomorrow's labor, beating on the Lemnian stone and final smoothing. Lucius moves among the workers, nodding in approval. He dips a fingertip into the fine dust of chalk, rubs it between thumb and forefinger, and presses it against the cloth. Good, he murmurs. The fibers drink it well. His eyes linger on a pleated tunic, where a seam draws a gentle crease. This crease shall hold until the starching that follows chapter 12. We must keep it snug but pliable. Then he straightens, smoothing his hands down the sides of his leather apron. In one corner, an apprentice sweeps stray powder into a shallow earthenware pan. The whisper of broom against stone, the low scrape of broom hair on marble, composes a quiet rhythm that threads through the larger practice of the launderer's art. At intervals, one of the fullers steps outside to peer at the burgeoning dawn. Against the glass-paned sky, the first wash of pale pink appears, distant chiming of temple bells echoing across the roofs of Rome. Inside, the work continues, as though in counterpoint to that slow awakening. In the lull that follows the initial dusting, the garments lie undisturbed, folded like patient travelers on a journey paused. They will remain thus until the sun climbs higher, when they are unfolded once more for percussion and brushing. Lucius instructs the men and women to allow the powders to rest in the fibers, to draw out every last trace of oil and to leave a residue of brilliance. By midday, he says, the clay and chalk will be spent of their duty. Then we renew our measures, or set the cloth to stone and mallet. And with that, he moves to the ledger, marking the names and hours spent on each piece. All around, the fullers shake out their garments, lift pegs, and readied tools, preparing for the final sweep of the broom. Soft fragments of chalk settle into the grooves of the stone floor, a testament to every fold and seam. The workers keep silent, as though communing with the ancient clay and chalk themselves, earthly gifts that, in the hands of these artisans, turn stained tunics into bright testament to Rome's dedication to cleanliness. By the time the morning light seeps fully into the hall, the tables stand almost bare. Each piece has received its measure of dust and pressure, and is folded away with meticulous care. Only a few vessels of powder remain, their rims caked with residue, waiting for fresh supplies. Above the workbench, a lantern hangs poised to catch any lingering daylight, its glass catching a golden glint as the sun's rays find their way inside. Thus ends the chapter of earth and chalk, a necessary pause between the cleansing in water and the ritual beating upon Lemnos's stone. The garments sleep in their powdery shrouds, awaiting the tactile shock of mallet and stone that will crack loose every last fragment of soil and chalk. In the tranquil hush of the Phallonica, the air still trembles with fine particles of white and tan, promises of bright linen and soft wool yet to come. And so, with the first tasks of linen and clay complete, the fullers step back to survey their work. The stage is set for chapter 9, where the garments will meet the smooth surface of imported marble, and the wooden mallet will fall in steady cadence. But until then, the chalk and terra Phallonica rest in the folds of fabric, silent agents of transformation, lending promise of brilliance to the soft, worn threads of Rome's everyday wardrobe. The workshop, still thick with the scent of chalk and fine earth, lay quiet in the wavering glow of the oil lamps. Around the central basin, bundles of washed and dusted textiles waited for the next stage of their transformation. Here, on a raised platform of rough-hewn wood, stood the Lemnian stone, a broad, flattened slab imported across the Aegean, hewn by skilled stonemasons on the island of Lemnos. Its surface was cool and mottled, worn smooth over seasons of repeated toil. Before that stone would bear the marks of heavy mallets, the fullers paused. The air was heavy with damp lint, as if the fibers themselves whispered faint echoes of past labors. A woolen blanket, still damp and saturated with chalk powder, lay folded on a low bench. Its weight was deceptive. A folded cloth could feel lighter than the final product, but once unfurled and draped across stone, it pressed down with the soft resilience of compacted wool. The fuller knelt on one knee beside the bench. With deliberate care, he lifted the blanket by two corners, inhaling the faint, earthy scent that rose from the chalk-lined fibers. For a moment, he let the blanket fall into his hands, letting gravity stretch and tease the fabric to its full shape. He positioned the blanket across the Lemnian slab, ensuring each fold lay flat, each layer touching the stone's even surface. In gentle motions, his fingers coaxed the edges into place, one corner stretched to the slab's worn edge, another smoothed toward the center. The rough pebbles embedded in the stone shone like subdued stars in the flicker of the lamplight, each grain a reminder of distant shores and centuries of human hands. The blanket, once rigid with chalk, now spread evenly, a pale shadow against the darker tones of the stone. At his side lay the mallet, its head fashioned from solid oak, heavy enough to drive out the deepest grime, yet balanced to return upward without jarring the arm. The handle, fitted to the fuller's grip, was polished smooth by long seasons of sweat and hands coated with clay dust. He lifted it with a measured motion, feeling its weight settle through the length of his arm. The lamp beside him hissed quietly, its wick crackling like distant thunder, as if stirring to life in anticipation. He raised the mallet. The muscles of his shoulder coiled under the linen tunic. In that moment, all noise beyond the rhythm of his breath seemed to halt. The distant clatter of pottery, the soft drip of water into stone basins, the low murmur of other workers methodically finishing their own tasks, all receded to a hush. He drew a calm breath, bracing himself for the first strike. Then, with a swift but controlled motion, the mallet fell. The sound echoed sharply across the Phalanca, ringing from stone walls and bouncing off wooden beams. Each blow drove the fibers downward, pressing chalk and powder deep into the fabric where hidden dirt lay awaiting release. The vibration traveled up his arm, a low rumble that settled into his bones. For a moment, his vision blurred with the impact, as if the stone beneath and the lamp above had become one living presence. Then he struck again, 40, 50 times in steady succession. Each stroke followed the last like the measured dipping of oars in calm water. Around him, time slowed. He felt the pulse of each impact, the brief, sharp recoil in his wrist, the tremor moving through his forearm, the lingering throb in his shoulder when he paused. He shifted his stance, planting one foot slightly forward to bear the weight more evenly. The linen tunic at his waist dampened with sweat, but his breathing remained steady, slow out, slow in, allowing him to conserve strength. He moved methodically, striking along the length of the blanket, then across its full width, tracing imaginary lines to ensure each section received equal attention. Between sets, he paused to stretch. The shoulder that held the mallet dropped, and he rolled it outward in circular sweeps. He rotated his neck, feeling the small cracks of muscle and tendon loosening. In the pause, he reached down to the slab and pressed his palm against its cool surface. The contrast between burning flesh and cold stone steadied him, reminding him of the balance at the heart of this labor, fire in the veins, ice beneath the cloth. The stone required no words of encouragement, it offered quiet solidity. The cloth, once soiled and limp, would emerge clean, crisp, ready for its next transformation. He resumed his work with renewed calm. 3 strikes at each point, pressing deep, then a step forward, another 3 strikes. The echoes built a gentle rhythm that matched his pulse. Sweat beaded at his hairline, trickling down the back of his neck into the nape. His sandals, strapped tight with leather straps, pressed into the dust of chalk and clay that had fallen to the platform. With each blow, more fine particles sifted from the blanket, drifting like pale motes of dust in the lamplight. Soon, the air itself glowed with suspended fragments, catching the light like a faint haze. Another pause. He set the mallet aside and lifted the blanket's corner to examine the surface. The cloth lay flatter now, fibers coaxed into alignment, the chalk dispersed and grip loosened. The blanket had lost its previous rigidity, it now felt pliant, springing under his hand. Tiny threads of residual lint clung to the stone as if reluctant to leave. He ran a finger along the slab's surface, brushing stray fragments aside. Then, placing his hand beneath the damp edge of the blanket, he slipped it free, folding it precisely into 4s. He carried the folded cloth to the side bench, aligning it in a neat stack with the others. The pile grew heavier with each addition, each piece a tribute to the stone's quiet work. As he replaced the mallet on its peg, he looked toward the small window high on the far wall. A pale shaft of sunlight had crept through, striking the dust in a single ray. It was the first hint of midday brightness, calling to the rhythm of the workshop that ever turned from one task to the next. Soon, the blanket just finished would move on to be rinsed once more, then starched or oiled according to its intended use. But for now, it stood cleansed of hidden soils, restored by the simple, ancient pact between wood and stone. The Lemnian slab, imported across sea and time, had done its work. The fullers, sweat on their brows and strength in their arms, had given shape to the process that would continue in the chapters yet to come, midday rest and reflection, sorting by color and quality, and all the patient, measured labors that lay ahead. He took one last breath, lifting the mallet once more for a practiced swing, then set it down gently. The fullness of the morning's work began to ease, as though the stone itself exhaled. The heavy cloth lay flat and quiet, its hidden journey toward whiteness and softness resumed under the steady hand of time. In the hush that followed, the Phalanca awaited the next breath of movement, the next chapter in its long, unhurried story. When the sun has climbed to its zenith and the breeze that stirred at dawn slackens into a warm stillness, the labors of the Phalanca pause at last. The long hours spent in the clamor of vats and channels give way to a deliberate quiet, as the fullers gather in the shadowed alcove of the laundry yard. Overhead, the open roof of the central courtyard frames slivers of cloud drifting across a sky as blue as polished glass. Here, at the very heart of the Phalanca, they claim a brief interlude, bread, olives, wine, and the hum of distant voices shaping their midday rest. A low wooden bench sits hard against the stone wall, its surface worn smooth by countless bodies. Leaning back, the fullers ease aching spines and rest aching shoulders. A man with a face darkened by the sun reaches into a coarse linen sack and retrieves a chunk of bread whose crust crackles like dry leaves. He breaks it free in ragged pieces, offering half to a companion whose gaunt cheeks hollow with fatigue. Goat's cheese, fresh, fragrant, and mild, is passed from hand to hand, its pale flesh flecked with tiny strands of straw from the stall. Between each morsel, they wipe sticky fingers on the hems of their oilskins, careful not to sully their next load of linens. The goat's milk cheese, firm yet yielding, leaves a faint tang on their tongues. Their lips glisten with residual oil and crumbs. A low murmur of conversation weaves through the group. They speak of the market in the forum, where bolt after bolt of cloth is draped across tables groaning under the weight of rare dyes, Tyrian purple stolen in minute threads, linen as white as cloud. One fuller mentions that the price of emmer flour has risen again, another grumbles about the baker's recent lack of crust. They exchange news of harvests and of whether tonight's supper in their own homes will include any fresh vegetables or only salted fish. The talk drifts to rumors of the next festival, perhaps the Compitalia or a feast in honor of Ceres, when the fullers will have free hours to join processions and toss handfuls of grain. A clay jug, its side speckled with the palimpsest of splashed wine and repeated repairs, emerges from under the bench. Inside, Bitter wine must have been diluted with water drawn from the same cistern that feeds their channels. The taste is cool and tart on the tongue, a gentle respite from the earthiness of chalk and clay that has dusted their hair and robes all morning. Passing the jug in a slow, measured rotation, each man drinks only a shallow sip, mindful of duty and moderation. They do not wish the heady warmth of Bacchus to steal away the precision required for their craft. Yet even this slight headiness unclasps in them a sense of ease, a pause in which the world narrows to the simple pleasure of shade, good company, and the murmur of water still running behind them. From somewhere beyond the enclosing walls comes a faint knell, the toll of a bronze bell, calling the faithful to the midday sacrifice at the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus. Its sound drifts through the air, solemn and remote, like a distant promise of calm on a troubled sea. For a heartbeat, the fullers fall silent, their half-chewed bread held suspended. They listen as the bell's echoes curl up the walls of nearby houses, mingle with the growl of carts in the street, and dissipate in the high afternoon air. In that moment, the ancient rhythms of ritual and labor meet, sacred and profane converging in a single tone. One fuller dips his fingers into a shallow bowl of olives, lifting a small cluster speckled in brine and grease. He offers them in silent friendship, nodding to a friend whose arms bear the calluses of years spent scrubbing and stomping. The friend takes 2 olives and holds them between his teeth while he swigs from the wine, then sighs. "Tomorrow I will bring figs," he says, voice low. "They say the merchants down by the Circus Maximus have ripe ones at a good price." The first speaker grunts a thin laugh and leans forward. "As long as we finish today's work before the sun turns sour, I will join you." Under the open sky, shafts of sunlight lean across the courtyard floor in pale ribbons. They catch on the scattering of white fragments, bits of chalk, scraps of linen, a broken shell, that pepper the ground. A soft breeze stirs the top of a ladle left near the grated drain, sending a small echo as it nudges the stone. The fullers watch these minor movements as if willing the moment to stretch. Each man knows the second half of the day will demand fresh attention. Fabrics must be sorted by color and quality, then carefully starched, smoothed, and laid out to dry. The tempo of cleaning, beating, rinsing, brushing, inspecting, it will rise again. And yet for now, this hush is theirs. A fuller with sandy hair stands, dusts his hands on his tunic, and retrieves a slender wooden stylus from his belt. With practiced strokes, he makes a quick mark on a small tablet resting on the bench beside him, a tally of loads finished before midday. The numbers, carved in wax, bear witness to their labor. He lifts his head, reveals a hint of pride, and then set the stylus aside. No further figures will be added until they return, sweat once more glinting across their brows. Slowly, reluctantly, they rise. Each man stretches limbs stiffened by stillness, shoulders roll, backs arch, calves flex. The midday bell's echo fades entirely now, and the steady drip of water from a sluice gate draws their attention back to the tasks awaiting them. A final swallow of wine, a last olive in the mouth, and a faint clatter as the clay jug is set down. They exchange nods rather than words, a silent pact to re-engage with the same unerring care that defines their art. As they step from the shade toward the whispering channels beyond, a warm gust brushes away the small fragments of chalk and dust at their feet. The scent of hot stone and damp linen rises. Ahead, the next bench waits, stacked with half-washed garments sorted by hue. Their hands, already tinged with the patina of noon's work, will soon press new folds into cloth, apply starch, or smooth the intricate patterns on a silk scarf. Each movement, strictly measured, rehearsed time and again, will shape the fibers until they gleam with the hard-won purity that Rome's citizens prize. But for a fleeting heartbeat between rest and toil, the fullers have tasted the simple grace of midday, the muted clink of bowls, the murmur of friends, the distant clang of temple bells. In that moment, the precise machinery of the Phallonica pauses, and they stand, bread and goat cheese consumed, wine and olives finished, with eyes lifted just long enough to remember why this work matters. Then, as the sun leans toward its descent, they bend once more to their labor, determined that each fold, each stain removed, and each brightened thread will echo the quiet dignity of this shared respite, guiding every garment through the remainder of its ancient, meticulous cleansing. A gentle hush has fallen over the Phalonica after the slow pace of the midday pause. The bright light that poured through the narrow clerestory windows now slants across the vaulted stone floor, illuminating columns of steam rising from damp cloths waiting on low benches. The Fullers, their strength refreshed by bread, goat's cheese, and a sip of diluted wine, stand in small clusters around long trestles, their work aprons still dusted with chalk and earth from the morning's labors. It is time to turn to the next stage, sorting the half-clean textiles by color and quality before they move on to starching, sun-whitening, and final finishing. 1. Gathering the textiles. Each fuller carries a pile of sodden garments, tunics, cloaks, and togas, in varying states of cleanliness. On one bench, cream-white linen shirts lie alongside pale flaxen wraps, on another, deeper hues of madder-dyed wool and purple-tinted silk hang in folds. The air smells faintly of chalk dust and a lingering tang of olive oil from earlier polishing. With deliberate care, the workers spread the fabrics out, smoothing wrinkles and splaying edges so that the true shade of each cloth can be seen. Some pieces glisten as stray droplets form tiny pools in the weave, others appear muted after hours in alkaline baths. But now, under the clarity of the afternoon light, every hue is revealed in its full subtlety. 2. Comparing faded purple to fresh white. Near the open courtyard wall stands Lucius, the foreman's nephew, who has inherited his uncle's keen eye for color. He holds up a faded purple-dyed tunic, its once venturous shade now softened to a gentle lavender. Beside it, he places a crisp white linen tabard, its fibers bright and almost translucent under the sun's gaze. He leans in, tilting his head, inspecting how the dye has held to the wool's fibers. Even in its less vibrant state, the tunic still bears enough of its original warmth to satisfy a client who demands only a light wash and finishing. The linen, by contrast, will require starching to restore its sharp, geometric folds. With a nod to his brother Fullers, he initiates the silent conversation of sorting, lavender with the soft colors, white with the pale linens. 3. Weighing and estimating. Along the length of the bench lies a simple balance scale, its pans fashioned from thin sheets of copper. One by one, the fullers place small swatches of cloth in the left pan, balancing them with lead shot on the right. A few grams more or less may seem trivial, but careful reckoning of each piece's weight and absorbency is how they predict how much chalk or starch will be needed for its final finishing, and how long each will take to dry on the racks in the courtyard. A heavier, tightly woven wool cloak draws more chalk and requires extra beating on the Lemnian stone, a soft linen shift calls only for a light brushing of starch. As they record these weights on wax tablets, the fullers map out the afternoon's workload with precision born of years of practice. 4. Charcoal markings and piles. Once a garment's color group and weight are determined, each fuller reaches for a short stick of vine charcoal. It has a deep black mat, easy to mark on rough wooden beams or directly across the folded hems. With a swift, confident stroke, they inscribe a little dash, sometimes accompanied by a letter or simple sign, near the edge of the fabric or on the beam above its pile. R for rubrum, reddish, L for luteus, yellow-tinted, N for Niger, dark, and B for blancus, white. These charcoal labels let any worker passing through the hall know at a glance where each group is destined next: the chalk dust platform, the starching basin, the olive oil polishing table, or the open courtyard racks. Piles grow into neat towers of linen and wool, each crowned by a slender stick of charcoal marking its place and purpose. 5. Quiet conversation. Although this is essentially a silent undertaking, a low murmur drifts among the benches. Anna, whose deft hands once walked the narrow streets collecting household linens, comments softly on the lavender tunic's dye, matter from Etruria, I wager, she says. Marcus, the oldest fuller, who has seen dyes fade and brighten through decades of washes, replies in a hushed tone, yes, and well set. It will please the senator's son who hates strong hues. Across the bench, Flavia observes that the new white wool cloak will need extra chalk to bring out its fibers. Better dust it twice, she advises, tapping her chalk-laden broom on the stone floor. These brief exchanges flow as naturally as the water that once rinsed their fabrics, each fuller sharing insights earned by time. 6. The rhythm of sorting. The afternoon wears on with steady rhythm. Hands move in practiced motions, lifting, weighing, marking, stacking, broken only by the occasional clink of lead shot in the scales pan or the soft rasp of charcoal on wood. The great vat where the urine alkali once bathed so many garments sits emptier now, its edges clean and ready for the next day. A wheel-mounted water channel, still flowing through the floor, carries away the final remnants of rinse water, its gentle gurgle underscoring the cadence of sorting. The birds beyond the open courtyard chirp in the late sun, and dust motes wander lazily through the shafts of light. 7. The importance of order. In the Phalonica, order is both practical and symbolic. Each stack of sorted cloth represents a promise to the client that their garments will return to them in the condition agreed upon. A misplacement, mixing a deep red with the whites, or forgetting to note a lighter shade, can lead to a fatal mistake, dye transfer, uneven finishing, or a cloth return stained or too stiff. By keeping each hue and fabric grade separate, the fullers honor the trust placed in their hands. They think of the matron awaiting her finest toga, the merchant expecting crisp linen drapes, or the general seeking a well-polished wool cloak. Each pile of cloth carries its own story and purpose. 8. Setting the stage for tomorrow. As the last garment is weighed and marked, the fullers step back to survey their orderly ranks. They visualize the next stages, the whites moving on to starching, the colored wools to chalk dust beds, the sturdy linens to gentle beating stones. Tomorrow, when dawn arrives once more, the rhythm will begin anew: fresh water, collected urine, soaking, treading, rinsing, bleaching. But until then, the sorted piles stand ready. Each is a small testament to patient labor, to the measured care of those who cleanse and renew. The sun dips toward the rooftops, and the workers, content with their day's progress, gather their tools, scales, charcoal sticks, heralded sticks of chalk. They leave the hall in quiet lines, allowing the afternoon light to linger on the fold of every cloth, marking the promise of final perfection in the chapters yet to come. When the morning's tasks of washing, rinsing, inspection, and sorting had at last reached their conclusion, a hushed stillness settled over the Phalonica. The clatter of wooden mallets against Lemnian stone had given way to a softer rhythm, the gentle simmering of grains on the hearth and the occasional hiss of steam escaping a heavy bronze cauldron. Now, in this restful interval before the sun would climb too high in the sky, the fullers turned their attention to the final, and surprisingly delicate, art of starching. Linen garments, prized for their crisp drape and cool touch, required a careful stiffening that could only be achieved by the cloudy, viscous water drawn from boiled barley or wheat. A low fire burned beneath an iron tripod, its embers glowing coals like the faint pulse of the earth itself. Upon the tripod balanced a wide bronze pot, blackened at the rim by countless previous washings. Into this vessel the foreman ladled measured handfuls of cereal, hulled barley from the nearby granary or fine wheat donated by a patrician client who preferred the smoothest finish. Each grain, translucent beneath the flicker of lampglow and flame, promised to yield its starch in a milky cloud. The fullers worked with deliberate slowness. One stirred the mixture in a wide, circular motion, using a long ashwood paddle smoothed by years of contact with water. The other pressed down any floating husks, keeping the brew uniform, while the foreman bent close, inhaling the soft, cereal scent that rose above the usual tang of laundered garments. In the still afternoon air, the starching pot hissed as water boiled around the grains, and tiny bubbles formed a ring of lace at the surface. The firelight danced across the cauldron's dark surface, flickering gold upon the grain's pale sliver of membrane. Here, in this quiet moment, the fullers paused to observe the liquid's change, first clear, then tinged like fresh olive oil, and at last a soft opacity, as if a shard of marble had dissolved. With careful attention they judged the consistency. Too thin, and the linen would remain limp; too thick, and folds would set like brittle clay. Once the mixture assumed the proper shade, an almost colorless cream, they drew the pot from heat and set it upon a low hearthstone to cool. While the starch water tempered against the warm stone, the workmen prepared their stations. Along one side of the Phalonica, iron hooks had been driven into the yellowed plaster walls at regular intervals. Beneath each hook lay a shallow wooden tray to catch drips, and beneath that, a line of smooth river pebbles embedded in clay, arranged to direct wayward moisture back toward the drain. The fullers carried bundles of collars, cuffs, and hems, portio and manica, from the sorting benches, each labeled in charcoal for identification. The sunlight that filtered through the narrow clerestory windows touched the collars first, illuminating their neatly pressed creases, while the cuffs hung like pairs of expectant hands. By turns, each fuller dipped a length of linen into the cooling starch bath. As the cloth met the liquid, it absorbed the milky grain water, and the weave tightened, fibers swelling with absorbed moisture. The water darkened to a clouded gray as starch filled every interstice. From behind, a second fuller passed, lifting the sodden collars one by one, shaking them gently to remove excess, then hooking them by their corners. They sagged, heavy now with liquid weight, before straightening and settling into a taut curve. The man beside them plucked each cuff from its tray, held it aloft for a moment's inspection, then guided it carefully onto its hook, ensuring that the crease at the wrist lay perfectly aligned with the attendant's eye. Drops fell in a slow, rhythmic drip, 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 echoing in the hushed chamber like raindrops on tiled roofing. The fullers watched the garments press out their excess moisture, inch by measured inch, until only a fine sheen remained upon the starchy linen. The air grew warmer around the pot, the faint scent of boiled grain mingled with the residual aroma of olive oil from earlier wool polishing. A soft breeze from the open archway carried in a distant murmur of traffic, the clop of mule hooves on cobbles, the faint cry of a fishmonger at the forum, the toll of a temple bell marking an imminent sacrifice. Yet here in the starching alcove, time seemed to slow, measured by the drip of liquid and the gentle tautness of linen. When the collars and cuffs had drained nearly dry, the fullers began the next stage, smoothing. They worked over a long, narrow plank of oak, planed smooth and kept for this single purpose. With a goat hair brush, its bristles soft yet resilient, they took each garment in turn, laying a collar flat upon the board. Then, using short, precise strokes, they brushed the starch into the fibers. The strokes followed the grain of the linen, moving from center to edge, coaxing the fabric to lie almost unnaturally flat. Folds seemed to vanish beneath the slow massage of bristles, and each press of the brush sealed in the crispness that would define the wearer's appearance. Occasionally a fuller would pause and hold the brushed collar up to the waning light, inspecting it for stray lumps of starch or a crease that refused to lie. If he found one, he returned to the board, repeated his strokes, and at last pronounced it perfect. Cuffs required a gentler hand. The folded linen at the wrist, once brushed, became a stiff frame through which the arm would slide. If too rigid, it would pinch; if too soft, it would flop. The fullers turned the cuffs inside out, applying the brush along both surfaces, then folded them back and smoothed the edge by guiding it under the paddle used earlier for stirring. The result was a tidy rectangular band of linen nearly as springy as leather but infinitely cooler next to the skin. As each collar and cuff emerged from this ritual, the fullers placed it carefully upon a clean bench and covered it with a dry linen cloth to shield it from dust until the moment of final assembly. In the hush of their labors, the fullers recalled the garments they had prepared the day before: a senator's toga with its distinct purple border, a merchant's cloak of plain white linen, the intricate folds of a matron's stola. Each had passed through these same hands, experienced the same transformations under the scoured water, the chalk, the beating on Lemnian stones, and now this final infusion of crispness. The Phalonica, once a place of labor and noise, had transformed into a sanctuary of order and silent precision. As the last of the starched linen cooled upon its hook, a ray of afternoon sunlight fell through the arch above, striking the garments and turning the starch to a faint shimmer. The collars and cuffs seemed to glow, edges accentuated by the interplay of light and shadow. The fullers exchanged a glance, knowing that the next chapter of this cycle lay just beyond the courtyard door: the bright air of midday heat, the open sky, the gentle flutter of drying linen on wooden racks. There the starch would set fully, the crisp folds preserved by sun and breeze, ready to be returned to their owners at day's end. Thus, with hands careful and deliberate, the fullers concluded the art of starching and smoothing. In the calm aftermath of their measured toil, they took a moment to stand amidst the silent ranks of collars and cuffs, breathing in the faint, sweet aroma of boiled grain and dried linen. Their work, humble though it was, transformed common cloth into a statement of dignity and order. As they prepared to carry their bundles into the courtyard beyond, each felt the quiet pride that comes from perfecting even the simplest of tasks, knowing that the crispness of a collar, the precise fold of a cuff, could speak volumes of the skillful hands that had brought them to life. And so, with the starching complete, they stepped outside. The sun lay high and unwavering above the courtyard's pale stones, beckoning the linen to dry and set. From here, the next step would begin, drying in the warm air, where drooping threads would lift in the breeze and each garment's form would harden to its final shape. But that, as the fullers well knew, was a story for chapter 13. The morning sun had climbed higher by the time the fullers emerged from the cool shadows of the inner washing rooms. Its rays spilled in slanted beams across the polished flagstones of the central courtyard, bringing warmth and light to the stone-paved expanse. Here, open to sky and wind, the damp fabrics, fresh from their final starching and smoothing, would hang or lie across wooden racks until the last trace of moisture vanished into the air. The courtyard was both stage and sanctuary, a place where the raw labor of cleansing and finishing garments met the subtle alchemy of sunlight and breeze. A low murmur rose among the workers as they shouldered heavy wooden frames, each one laden with still-dripping collars, sleeves, and tunic hems. The racks had been built by local carpenters, sturdy uprights joined by slender crossbars, designed to support yards of linen and wool without bending. Some held curved poles for draping cloaks, while others stood open like ladders, ready to bear the weight of multiple layers of clothing. As each fuller guided a rack into place, the nap of the fabrics caught the sun and glinted white or dyed purple, ochre, or gray, depending on the day's orders and the wearer's needs. Celius, the foreman, paused at the threshold of the courtyard to survey the morning's assembly. He wore a light tunic whose hem was already stiff from yesterday's bout of starch. He lifted a hand in greeting to his workers, then pointed toward a cluster of marble columns at the southern end. "Here," he said quietly, "we shall set the racks so that each breeze passes beneath. The sun will travel east to west, so turn the tables as the day moves on." Following his instruction, the fullers arranged the drying racks in long, evenly spaced rows. The flagstones beneath were warm underfoot, and from where they stood, one could see the gentle incline of the pavement channeling leftover rinse water into the shallow drains along the courtyard's edge. Now, however, no more water would flow. Today's fabrics would release only vapor, leaving no stains or suds behind. Soft clatters rang as the workers secured each garment with small wooden clasps, carved with simple grooves to grip the fibers without tearing. A fuller lifted the cuff of a linen toga, spread it wide across a horizontal beam, and pressed the little peg into place. Another did the same with woolen mantles, smoothing folds, tapping out invisible creases, and pinning every edge. The chalky starch still clung in tiny white crystals. Here and there, faint wisps of steam spiraled from damp hems where the sun struck strongest, rising like ghosts that drifted toward the colonnade above. It was impossible not to pause for a moment and watch that silent steam dance. The courtyard was hushed except for the soft snapping of clasps and the gentle rustle of cloth shifting in the breeze. From beyond the open arches came the muted thud of a loaded cart along the street, the distant cries of market vendors, and the steady trill of a waterbird settled upon a distant basin. Inside, the fullers spoke in low tones, commenting on the weight of a heavy woolen cloak or the pale translucence of a fine silk tunic. "That purple is still strong," someone remarked. "It will keep its heat in the shade." "Turn the linen, east side first," another replied, brushing a speck of starch from his palm. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed directly overhead, and the courtyard lay bathed in light. The heat drew moisture from the fabrics with unfailing patience. Already the air felt warmer and drier, and Celius drew a shallow breath, savoring the scent of sun-baked stone mingled with the faint almond-like note of olive oil still clinging to recently polished wool. He glanced at the racks and noticed the first sign of a crease holding fast in a collar's fold. He beckoned one of the younger fullers. "Come here. Gently loosen that fold," he said, indicating a white linen shirt whose collar had bunched. Carefully the apprentice pried apart the layers and repinned the edge. "Better," Celius agreed, nodding. "If we leave it, the heat will bake it in there." Such small adjustments were part of the ritual. Every hour, someone moved along the lines, leaning palms against cloth to test for coldness, shifting wooden stands to follow the path of the sun, and sometimes repositioning moist garments that had been layered too deeply. The wind, varying in strength, would catch a hanging cloak and balloon it outward. A fuller stood ready to catch each billow, preventing a sudden tug from yanking a peg and dropping the fabric onto the dust. Each garment that had once been sullied with sweat, soil, and oil was now in the final stage of its transformation, dry, crisp, and luminous under the clear Roman sky. In a quiet corner, near a fountain whose gentle trickle offered a reprieve from the sun, two older fullers sat on low stools. They had just returned from midday errands, fetching a fresh half-gallon of barley starch for later batches, and now they watched the drying unfold. One sipped from a shallow bowl of water, its rim rimed with salt, and sighed with ease. "I never tire of this sight," he said. "It is as if we are orchestrators of wind and light." The other nodded, eyes fixed on a rack where a fine woolen cloak rippled in the breeze like a wave-swept sail. "Tomorrow we will take these down, polish them with oil, and perhaps see a new generation of togas arrive," he answered. "But for now, we must honor the speed of the wind." The courtyard slowly filled with the quiet rhythm of the drying process. Sun-kissed patches of color gleamed where dyed cloth caught the light most directly. In shaded corners, white linens glowed softly, as if the marble slabs from chapter 15 had been brought here in spectral fragments. A stray breeze bent a hem forward, revealing the spiral of the wash stamp that identified its owner. Small insects, drawn by the faint scent of grain starch, drifted over the fabric but vanished when a worker passed by. Birds perched on the edges of the colonnade, preening themselves against the warmth, as though even nature recognized the importance of this midday pause. Time passed with deliberate slowness. The sun arced across the sky, and the courtyard's angles of light changed accordingly. At each shift, the fullers made their rounds, checking for stubborn damp spots that might crackle or warp. If a piece seemed to dry too quickly at the edges, risking a hard band where starch would flake, they dampened that section lightly from a separate bowl of water. If a cloak draped too deeply around a corner, holding moisture in a hidden fold, they pried it apart, letting fresh airflow reach every thread. All the while, their motions remained unhurried, almost meditative, a testament to generations of practice and the unchanging cycle of water, earth, and sun. As noon ebbed toward afternoon, a few pieces were already ready to be taken down. A silk scarf, stiff from chalk whitened in chapter 8, now lay perfectly bright and smooth. Celius directed that it be folded and passed along to the polishing table, where olive oil would be applied before final inspection. One fuller carried it away on a small board, leaving the rack beneath ready for repositioning. The courtyard felt calmer now, as fewer garments remained to be tended. The stones radiated residual heat, the air carried a faint aroma of drying cloth, and the world beyond the colonnade moved on, with passing carriages and the soft murmur of midday prayers from a distant temple. For the fullers, these hours in the courtyard were the culminating moment of their toil. In the hush between sun and wind, they watched as every drop of water took flight, as every fiber became crisp and resilient once more. Here, where ancient tradition met simple materials, they prepared garments for new owners, citizens who might wear these to banquets, sermons, or the daily rhythms of city life. And in that steady unfolding of sunlight across damp cloth, they found a quiet satisfaction, knowing that each piece was reborn through their care. When the last fragment of white linen fell slack and dry beneath the late afternoon sky, the fullers gathered one final time. They lowered the drying racks, dusted them off, and leaned them against the courtyard wall for cleaning. A faint, contented murmur ran through the group. Tomorrow, the polishing with olive oil would come next, followed by sunlight whitening, inspection, folding, and delivery. But for now, as they stood in the golden afterglow of midday, they simply watched the courtyard floor where droplets of water, heated by stone and sun, had vanished without a trace, proof of a cycle as ancient as the city itself. The low hum of conversation drifts across the courtyard as the Fullers gather around a simple wooden table at the edge of the drying racks. Several woolen cloaks, their fibers plumped by the sun's warmth, lie folded in neat piles, each one ready for its final treatment. Chapter 13. Sunlight whitening has left the white wool glowing like pale clouds against the marble slabs, but now it is time to restore deep, rich hues to the darker wools, to bring back the luster that sunlight and washing can leave dull. Here in Chapter 14, the ritual of polishing wool with olive oil begins, a subtle ceremony that infuses each thread with sheen while guarding the fibers against dust and drying. You watch one fuller scoop up a small, shallow bowl filled with pale, fragrant olive oil, pressed only a day before from the groves beyond the city walls. The translucent liquid catches the morning light, glinting like yellow honey. He places it carefully on the weathered tabletop, the wood grain worn smooth by years of similar rituals. The bowl sits centered, as if on an altar, and nearby rests a folded woolen cloak dyed with deep indigo. The air is faint with the fragrance of oil, mingled with the sun-warmed scent of wool and the faintest trace of chalk from earlier whitening. A hush settles, even the creaking of the drying rack seems to pause. With measured gestures, the fuller pours a single, measured drop of oil onto his left palm. The slick bead of liquid catches the light as he flexes open his hand. He then rubs his hands together slowly, first left against right, then right against left, spreading the oil in a thin, even film across both palms and the soles of his fingers. Each motion is deliberate, as though waking the oil to life. A thin sheen blossoms across the skin, like morning dew on grape leaves. The warmth of his hands softens the oil further, and he inhales gently, appreciating its faint earthiness, the hint of grass left behind by the olive press. He picks up the indigo cloak, unfolding it carefully so that no crease is pressed into the newly polished fibers. The wool, though dry, still carries a trace of moisture from the midday sun. He lays the cloth over a low stool, draping it so that he can reach its full length. One end brushes the stone floor, the other flutters in the slight breeze. He positions himself at the midpoint, palms poised over the wool surface. With the gentlest of strokes, he applies his oiled hands to the fibers, starting at the collar. His fingers glide through the nap, pressing the oil into every fold and strand. A muted squeak arises as the oil meets the wool, not unpleasant but soft, like the sound of cloth rubbed between wet fingers. Working systematically, he moves from the top of the cloak to the bottom hem, each pass overlapping the last by only half an inch. The strokes are slow, rhythmic, almost meditative, as if tracing invisible lines across a map. With each sweep, the once matte wool begins to assume a new depth, a soft radiance that seems to catch the light and hold it. The indigo dye darkens, pressing against the sheen in quiet harmony. At his side, another fuller uses a wide, soft bristled broom, made from goat's hair, to brush the wool lengthwise, distributing the oil evenly and removing any excess. The broom's bristles whisper across the cloth, coaxing unabsorbed oil into the fibers and brushing away the slightest residue. As they work, the fullers exchange brief observations about the quality of the oil and the condition of the cloaks. This batch pressed from the groves near Ostia has a richer aroma, one murmurs, inhaling the faint fruity top note. Yes, replies another, and see how it clings to the wool without darkening it too much. Perfect for deep colors. Their voices never rise, maintaining the calm stillness of the courtyard. Near the stone fountain, the trickle of water seems louder now, guiding the rhythm of their brushing, swish, swish, swish. After the first side is polished, the fuller folds the cloak in half, edges aligned with the precision of a craftsman. He lifts it onto a second stool, turning it to face the other direction. He repeats the process, drop of oil, rub of palms, then smooth, sweeping strokes over the wool. The second side yields to his ministrations more readily. The fibers, warmed and softened by the initial pass, absorb the oil fully, releasing a subtle oil-sweet scent that mingles with the sharp tang of stone and the dust of fine chalk from earlier stages. With both sides complete, the cloak rests over a horizontal pole, draped by its shoulders so that the weighted folds hang evenly. A gentle breeze rises, and you see the wool quiver, catching sparkles of light along its length. The sheen is delicate yet unmistakable, a sign that the cloak is no longer only clean, but also cared for, fortified against the city's dust and daily wear. These final moments of contact between hand, oil, and fiber mark the fuller's reverence for the material, an unspoken pact between craftsman and cloth. Beyond the courtyard gate, the city surges onward, horses clatter over cobbles, merchants barter in the forum, and temple bells toll the third hour. Yet here, within the walls of the Phalanaka, time is measured in pauses, the spread of oil, the gentle brushing, the soft fold of wool. With the cloak finished, the fullers arrange it in the proper pile for Chapter 15, the stark white wool destined for the sunlight whitening ritual. They exchange nods, recognizing that each step relies on the one before, and that only by honoring these slow, precise gestures can they deliver garments worthy of Rome's most discerning citizens. In this calm, reflective space, the ritual of olive oil polishing reveals itself not merely as a cleaning technique but as a moment of quiet craftsmanship. Hands, oil, and wool join in threefold harmony, the oil preserving the luster of color, the wool regaining suppleness, and the fullers affirming their ancient art. As the sun drifts higher, shadows retreat and golden daylight filters through the courtyard, illuminating the polished cloaks in a gentle glow. They are ready now, brightened, strengthened, enriched, for the next stage at dawn's light, when marble slabs will once more welcome them for the final testament of the sun. When the sun has climbed to its zenith, pouring a steady, bright light into the heart of the Phalanaka's open courtyard, the fullers turn their attention to the final and most ritualistic stage of the wash, the sunlight whitening of pure white garments. After a morning spent in the heavy, scented embrace of olive oil and the muted slap of woolen cloaks against Lemnian stone, now the bright glare of Apollo's domain becomes the agent of true purification. In this high-ceilinged courtyard, ringed by marble columns and pale plaster walls, the whiteness of a toga is not only restored but celebrated. Here, every fold is exposed to the sun's blazing scrutiny, every thread laid bare in a quiet ceremony that moves at a measured, almost reverent pace. The marble slabs stand in neat rows across the courtyard's sunniest quadrant, their surfaces warmed by hours of Roman daylight. Each slab is cleaved from the same gleaming stone quarried along the coast of Anzio, chosen for its cool, even texture and its capacity to reflect light rather than absorb heat. As the morning shadows retreat, the fullers gather around these slabs, carrying canvas-covered bundles of togas, stoli, and men's tunics. They proceed without haste, each man and woman mindful of the care the fabric requires. The air here is still, save for a gentle cross breeze that ruffles the edges of an awning overhead and stirs the musty scent of lingering olive oil. One fuller kneels at the first marble block and gently peels back the canvas. Beneath lies a toga pure as newly fallen snow, its surface touched only by the softest brush of prior cleaning. Unfurling it in slow motion, he allows the cool air to slip between its folds. The fabric floats briefly before settling in a single layer across the length of the slab. His fingertips trace the hem to ensure it lies perfectly flat, for even the slightest wrinkle might cast a shadow that dulls the whiteness under the sun's glare. In this moment, the simple act of spreading cloth becomes an exercise in stillness and precision. Nearby, another fuller fastens a slender wooden rod, some 6 feet in length, over a second slab. This rod is a tool as old as the trade itself, a slender pole of seasoned oak, polished smooth by years of use. With deliberate care, she hooks one edge of the toga onto the rod's notch and, shifting her body weight, lifts it a palm's breadth off the marble. Under the bright sky, she rotates the rod in a gentle arc, flipping the fabric so that the opposing side now receives Apollo's rays. The movement is fluid, unhurried, up, around, and down in one unbroken gesture. Under the sun, the cloth takes on a fleeting translucence, each flip revealing the weave's fine interplay of warp and weft as pale threads catch the light like spun glass. As the togas rest again on the marble, the fullers pause to observe. They stand at a respectful distance, eyes narrowed against the glare, scanning every inch for the slightest cast of yellow or pale gray. Where a minute stain remains, they note its position and mark it with a tiny pebble or a slip of broken clay, an unspoken signal to return later for gentle reworking. A hush falls over the courtyard as they move from slab to slab, whispering to the fabrics in the language of labor, an art of subtle gestures, soft-spoken evaluations, and delicate adjustments. Above, the sun arcs slowly westward. Shadows deepen around the column bases and the warm stone begins to emit a faint, welcoming heat. The fullers move with the day's progression, shifting to ensure each garment is bathed in direct light. Where the east side grows shaded, they reposition racks and shuffle slabs into parallel rows that track the sun's trajectory. A pair of workers tilts a slab ever so slightly, precise as a builder aligning walls, and slides it closer to the brightest patch of courtyard. The stone's polished surface gleams under the heavy sky, and the fullers take satisfaction in the slow, gradual transformation of cloth from pale to luminous. Between each rotation, the fullers brush the garments lightly with soft broom-tipped brushes made of goat hair. This is not a sweeping motion but a gentle caress, intended to lift away the tiniest particles of dust or stray pollen that might adhere during the whitening. A soft, dry crackle accompanies each stroke as lint and residual granules tumble onto the marble. These are swept away in small piles, gathered with a copper scoop, and deposited into a shallow trough before being carried off to the garden as nourishment for young olive saplings. Even in the act of cleansing fabric, the fullers maintain a circular economy, turning every cast-off into sustenance for the land. Occasionally, the foreman, a broad-shouldered man named Marcus Livius Celer, strides through the ranks to inspect progress. His eyes are keen and exacting, but his manner is unhurried. He lifts the edge of a robe with leather-gloved fingers, leans close to scrutinize the fibers, then nods and moves on. Where he spots a stubborn smudge, he lowers a hand and whispers an instruction to the nearest fuller, who steps forward with a small brush dampened in spring water. With soft, almost inaudible strokes, the worker pillows the stain, drawing it toward the edge of the cloth without disturbing the surrounding whiteness. Then, guided by Marcus's steady gaze, she applies a paste of fuller's earth and gently works it into the spot before laying the garment flat again to bask in the light. As mid-afternoon advances, the courtyard's heat becomes more pronounced. The marble radiates warmth that presses upward through the soles of coarse-soled sandals. The fullers pause at intervals, raising ceramic jugs to their lips and sipping cool water drawn from the aqueduct's latest flow. They breathe slowly, eyes half closed, allowing the sun's firm yellow light to wash across their faces. There is a rhythm here that is neither forced nor entirely instinctive but aligns with the steady journey of the sun and the human body's need for respite. Each moment of rest is a brief offering to the process itself, an acknowledgement that true whiteness cannot be rushed. Before the ceremony concludes, every garment has been rotated at least 3 times, each pass under the sun taking care to treat every fiber equally. The final turn is the most significant, a slow, ceremonial moment when the fullers gather in a loose semicircle and, in unison, lift the rods one last time. Like turning a page in a great book, they flip the cloth so it faces the light once more. It hangs suspended for a heartbeat, catching the sun at its full power, and then settles with a soft sigh on the marble. One by one, the fullers step forward to collect the finished pieces. They fold each toga into a precise rectangle, careful not to crease the newly brightened surface. Each fold is as considered as a prayer, marking the completion of a cycle that began with the murky depths of alkaline baths and ended in the clear, unfiltered light of day. The whiteness now stands unblemished and pure, ready for the final inspection that will take place in the next chapter. Under the sun's final rays before they tilt toward dusk, the fullers place the folded garments on low wooden platforms, arranging them in neat stacks by client name, an orderly tribute to meticulous labor. As the sun slides west and the courtyard cools, these radiant togas await the skilled hands that will examine seams, mend tiny holes, and deliver the final seal of approval. In the golden slant of late afternoon, the white cloth glows like freshly fallen snow in a winter dawn, an emblem of purity reborn through sweat, skill, and sunlight. And so, As chapter 15 draws to its close, the stage is set for the last touches of repair and refinement, ensuring that every finished garment reflects not only the sun's power but the fuller's unwavering devotion to their ancient craft. The pale morning light filters through the narrow courtyard windows as the fullers prepare for the final stage of their labor. In this hushed hour, when the air still carries the faint coolness of dawn and the bustle of the city has yet to reach its midday peak, the workshop feels suspended between night and day. Each garment, after its long journey through baths of urine and chalk, rubbing on stone and soaking in starch, now awaits the last assessment that will determine its readiness for the client's hand. Here, in chapter 16, we enter the moment of final inspection and repairs, a delicate ritual that hinges on skilled eyes and practiced fingers. A single lamp, trimmed and refilled with olive oil the previous night, hangs from an iron hook overhead. Its light casts gentle shadows across the inspection table, a broad slab of weathered oak scarred by time and use. On this surface lie the laundered togas and tunics, their fibers brightened and softened but still bearing hidden flaws. The foreman beckons the most experienced fuller forward. Under his steady gaze, each seam is unrolled like a scroll, examined beneath both lamplight and the growing glow of day. First, they unfurl a crisp white tunic. The fuller holds it up by the shoulder seams, stretching it lightly to reveal any grain or distortion in the weave. His thumbs trace along the length of the stitching, feeling for irregularities, tiny gaps or whispers of weakness where threads may have thinned. When his fingers pause at a nearly invisible hole, he marks the spot with a small charcoal smudge on the fabric's edge, so no further blemish escapes notice. The tunic sags slightly as he lays it back down, awaiting the gentle hand of the mender. Next, a cloak of fine wool imported from Gaul is lifted into the sunlight that has begun to stream through the open doorway. The fibers glow with a subtle sheen, the olive oil treatment having restored their natural luster. Yet, even here, the fuller finds a loose thread near the hem, where the weight of the cloak has frayed the edge. He carefully snips the stray fiber with bronze scissors, the snick of metal on wool as soft as a whisper. Then, tucking the remaining edge under a thumb, he knots the broken strand back into the weave, disguising the repairs so well that only the trained eye might ever detect it. A pile of garments waits on the side bench, chlamyses, simple white stolas, and richly dyed tunics. One by one, they undergo the same measured attention. The fuller places each piece on a slanted surface beneath a small portative window. Here, the natural light reveals subtle discolorations, an iron-rich stain on a linen hem, the faint yellowing of an underarm on a stola. In deliberate slow motion, he threads a fine-needled awl with linen thread, pulling it through the cloths weft in tiny, almost invisible stitches. Each stitch draws the torn edges together, closing the breach like the seam of a garment itself. Between the garments, the craftsman paused to exchange quiet words. A mender admires the evenness of a stitched seam, remarking how the client's household must treat this cloth with respect to have spared it from more severe wear. The foreman nods in agreement, measuring his words with care so as not to disrupt the concentration of the workshop. Outside, the distant clang of a baker's paddle against dough and the soft bleat of a goat tethered in a neighboring yard combine to form a gentle urban symphony. After several long breaths, the team turns its gaze to colored clothing. A tunic dyed in deep madder red, once vibrant but now slightly puddled in hue, is held up against a white wall. In the vaulted arch of the falonica, the cooler tones of stone contrast with the warm color of the wool, revealing where the dye has settled too heavily in one place. The fuller dips a small brush into a mild cleanser made from ground spuma earth, applying it sparingly to lift the excess pigment. With each careful stroke, he restores a more even tone, then sets the garment aside to rest before a quick rinse. A basin of fresh water stands ready, drawn from the morning cistern, filtered through cloth to catch stray sand. Here, after mending, each piece is given a final dip to remove charcoal marks, chalk dust, or the faint residue of soap. The fullers swirl the cloth in the gently flowing water, feeling the fabric's texture under their fingertips. They listen for the soft swish, the only sound in the stillness of the hall. When the garments emerge, dripping but renewed, they are shaken once, twice, to encourage any remaining droplets to fall away. Now begins the ritual folding. The fullers lay each garment flat on a polished stone bench, smoothing the fibers with open palms. Corners are aligned in precise angles, folded inward, then over, then under, until each toga or stola sits in a compact, perfect rectangle. The sound of cloth whispering over itself is almost inaudible, yet for the workers, it is the sweetest melody of the day, the cloth conforming to its final shape, ready for the client's home. With each fold, they count silently, 1 fold for the shoulder, 2 for the waist, 3 for the hem, ensuring consistency across every order. Thread ends are trimmed with those same bronze scissors, the blades still gleaming faintly from earlier polishing. Knots are pulled tight and buried beneath the folds so that no loose ends betray the care taken at every stage. When a garment passes this test, a small wax tablet is inscribed with the client's mark and placed atop the stack. Soon, these tidy piles will be wrapped in linen cloth and prepared for delivery, but first they must stand here, completed works awaiting the sunlit courtyard beyond. The foreman moves among the tables, his gaze appraising the afternoon light now flooding through the open arch. He surveys the line of repaired, rinsed, and folded garments, each piece a testament to the fuller's skill. A final nod passes from hand to hand. The team exhales collectively, hands unclenching after hours of meticulous attention. Though the client's praise is yet to come, the work itself sings of quiet triumph, of cloth reborn through patience, of frayed edges strengthened by careful stitches. In this moment, the Phylonica breathes with the calm confidence of a craft perfected over generations. The fullers glide from table to table, polishing the last edge of a cuff here, straightening a drape there. Each gesture is measured, each movement imbued with respect for the fabric and for the lives these clothes will soon inhabit. As Chapter 16 draws to its close, the laundry house stands ready to send its wares back into the life of the city, garments made whole again, carrying with them the silent reverence of the craftsmen who tended them. And beyond these doors, new tasks await, folding and stacking, delivery, accounting, and at last the quiet ritual of closing the doors for the night. But for now, the final inspection and repairs complete, a hush of satisfaction reigns over the workshop, marking the culmination of one cycle and the promise of the next. The last of the small repairs, each stitch tied off, each seam smoothed, has been completed. A soft beam of late afternoon sunlight drifts through the upper windows of the Philonica's main hall, illuminating the fine dust motes that hover over rows of wooden shelves and benches. Now comes the final, ritualized task, folding and stacking each finished garment with precision, care, and respect for its owner. Here, in this hushed moment between labor and delivery, the fullers bring forward the clean togas, tunics, cloaks, and stoles, handling each piece as though it were a precious scroll. On a low, long table of aged oak, one fuller lays down a freshly laundered toga. Its linen is brilliantly white, its folds crisp from the midday starching and drying under the Roman sun. Kneeling, the fuller smooths away the tiniest wrinkle with a flat palm, then lifts one end of the broad sash and folds it inward along an invisible crease line. Fingers press the edge firmly enough to leave a faint imprint, guiding the thick fabric into a neat rectangle whose dimensions correspond exactly to the owner's locker space. The torso and drape, once suspended on pins, now lie flat and ordered, a geometry of cloth born of discipline and routine. Nearby, another fuller carries a stack of colorful tunics, dyed maroon, pale saffron, deep indigo, each fresh from the Lemnian stone beating and final rinsing. Atop a small wax tablet propped against the bench is inscribed, in precise cursive letters, the client's name, Lucius Cornelius Felix. With the stylus still in hand, the fuller refers back to the tablet, then picks up the first tunic. Folding the garment along its natural shoulder seams, the fuller aligns sleeves one atop the other, then brings the bottom hem up to meet the collar in a neat square. Each fold is deliberate, measured, never too tight, never too loose, to preserve the shape and the crispness achieved through starch and earth. As the tunic rests in the creased form, a goat hair brush is passed over its surface. With light, sweeping strokes, the fuller brushes away any lingering dust or stray fibers, restoring the smoothness of the linen. The brush's bristles whisper against the cloth, a faint susurration that echoes softly in the silent workshop. With a small nod, the fuller places the garment next to its namesake tablet, stacking it upon its folded companions until a neat pile grows 3 or 4 items high. Between the wooden columns, beams of fading light strike the layers of fabric, creating lines of shadow and brilliance. The Pholonika's interior walls, whitewashed some months before, have begun to show the patina of repeated washings in rain and humidity. Against this background, the bright colors and immaculate whites of the folded garments stand out like offerings on an altar. The fullers move from shelf to shelf, methodically filling the client cubbies carved into the oak. Each cubby holds pieces in order of wear, first the daily tunic, then the mantle for summer evening promenades, then the lighter stole for indoor visits. Everything is arranged according to the order recorded on the wax tablets and in the foreman's ledger. Across the courtyard doors, sunlight has softened into golden dusk, but inside the hall the oil lamps remain lit. Their flickering flames cast dancing shadows over the rows of shelves, and the scent of burned olive oil hangs lightly in the air. A careful hand dips a slender piece of soft cloth into the last oil lamp water pan and flicks it gently against a stack's topmost garment to pick up any speck of dust that might have drifted in. The cloth, damp and cool, leaves a faint sheen on the fabric's surface before being rinsed and returned to its place beside the brush and stylus. Occasionally, footsteps echo from the rear chambers where late, afternoon clients peer in through the slatted shutters, checking that their garments are folded just as they like. A polite fuller ducks into a narrow aisle, then returns with a small additional fold, adjusting the top of a toga to reveal a pleat that mirrors a familiar flourish from the wearer's home. It is these subtle details, the way the hem falls just so, the symmetry of overlapping folds, that elevate this craft from mere laundry to the art of presentation. Along the longest wall, a low bench holds an order of sabbatia, the ceremonial stoles dyed in purple and edged with gold thread. Each stole, once beaten free of lint and polished with olive oil, is now folded into a slender roll, its gilt edging visible at each end. At the head of the bench, the aedile's name glints faintly on a bronze tag laid beside the stack, Gaius Manius Laborio. The name itself is a mark of prestige, and the fullness of the pile is a testament to the Pholonika's reputation for reliability. As the evening air cools, the fullers step back to survey their work. The rows of wooden cubbies are lined evenly with garments, each stack balanced in height, each name tablet cleanly inscribed. Dust has been brushed away, stray threads picked free, last-minute realignments made so that no corner juts or fold sags. Even the floor is clear of stray fibers, swept meticulously between benches. This tableau, at once simple and exacting, is the culmination of the day's labors, from the first haul of urine and water to the gentle smoothing with oils and starch. Finally, the foreman enters, staff in hand, and walks the length of the shelves, inspecting. His footsteps tap against the stone floor in measured beats. He pauses before each namesake cubby, glancing at the wax tablet, then at the folded garments. A single nod or a gentle smile affirms approval. In a soft voice, he calls out, "Bene factum," and the fullers bow their heads in a quiet chorus of satisfaction. As dusk deepens, the doors are prepared for locking, but first a parting act. 2 incense burners from a corner altar are lifted, and a wisp of smoke curls through the wooden rafters. An offering to the Laras and Vesta, to ensure that tomorrow's labors proceed with the same grace and order. The flame within each lamp gutter dims to a thin, steady glow, and the hall grows hushed. In this moment, the Pholonika stands as a place where utility meets ritual, where the simple act of folding a toga becomes an exercise in respect, for the cloth, for the client, and for the small but unbroken tradition that has brought clean garments to Roman shoulders for centuries. The fullers depart one by one, leaving behind the quiet satisfaction of perfectly folded cloth, awaiting the patrons who will return at dawn to claim the fruits of patient hands. The afternoon sun had begun its slow descent toward the western horizon when the porters gathered at the edge of the Pholonika's courtyard. A warm, golden haze lingered in the air, softening the faces of the marble columns and casting elongated shadows across the worn flagstones. Inside, the last oil lamps flickered in their wall sconces, their faint glow mingling with the late light that filtered through the high windows. The day's labors, harvesting urine, stomping cloth in vats, beating garments upon the Lemnian stone, had yielded a bounty of fresh, spotless tunics, togas, and silks. Now, in this quiet hour between labor and dusk, these finished pieces would begin their final journey back to patrician villas, merchant houses, and the sprawling insulae of the city's bustling neighborhoods. A slender beam of light tracked across the courtyard as the master fuller nodded to his assistants, signaling the start of the delivery preparations. Two men stepped forward, each bearing a long, flat basket woven of pliant willow twigs. Within these baskets lay neatly folded togas, linen stoles, and woolen cloaks, all stacked according to household name and rank. With deliberate care, the porters lifted the garments one by one, enveloping each bundle in a square of soft linen cloth. Their hands were steady as they drew the cloth taut around the folds, smoothing out any stray threads or creases. Then, using lengths of coarse twine, spun from untreated hemp, they bound the packages in firm, rhythmic loops. The twine's fibers rasped softly under their thumbs, and the knots they tied were simple but secure, ensuring that no piece would loosen during transit. Beside the open doorway stood the delivery cart, its wooden frame freshly oiled so that its axles would turn with as little friction as possible along the cobbled streets. A thin film of olive oil gleamed on each wheel, applied by the younger fullers who had been entrusted with this small but vital task. The cart's bed was lined with a thick canvas tarp to cushion the precious cargo from bumps, and leather straps dangled ready to fasten the bundles in place. As each wrapped parcel was handed down, the porters arranged them in orderly piles, matching size to size, color to color, so that the white linens lay together, the deep-dyed silks in another cluster, and the heavier winter cloaks in a third section, all to allow for swift unloading at multiple stops. With final, satisfying rattles of rope, the cart was secured. The master fuller consulted a wax tablet, its freshly inscribed name still sweet with warm clay, and called out the order of deliveries. 3 parcels to the estate of Domitia Lucilla near the Subura, 2 more to the townhouse of the banker Lucius Septimius in the Esquiline district, and after that a final run to the grand portico of Senator Gaius Flavius, whose villa overlooked the Tiber's soft curve. The porters nodded, their broad shoulders set, and shouldered long poles that fit into iron hooks at either side of the cart. With a slight lurch and a creak of seasoned wood, they tilted the load into motion. They emerged from the threshold of the Phylonica into the crowded artery of the street. Sunlight still bathed the square in brightness, but the air had cooled perceptibly since midday, carrying a faint hint of evening incense from the nearby shrine. The din of the city pressed in on every side, the braying of restless mules, the sharp calls of merchants hawking figs and olives to late afternoon customers, the ring of small bells tied to the hooves of laden sheep being driven toward the market pens. Overall, the faint chime of temple gongs drifted from a distant plateau, calling passers-by to pause and speak a word of blessing to the household gods. As the porters guided the cart through the stony maze of the forum's outer colonnades, they had to navigate around clusters of senators draped in red-bordered togas, their sandals raised on marble steps as they exchanged curt greetings. A stone farther on, a group of apprentices from a nearby workshop jostled one another, their leather aprons freshly stained with pigment and plaster. The porters bowed slightly, murmuring "Ave" as they passed. One of them, Cato, paused to steady the cart while a runaway snack vendor's donkey brayed and lunged, its owner hurrying after to reclaim a stray grape cake that the animal had grabbed. The porters exchanged wry glances and murmured among themselves about the unpredictable temper of beasts at day's end. Between the pillars and the open arches of the basilica, they saw merchants packing away their wares, rolls of papyrus, bronze mirrors, strings of glass beads, preparing for the day's final sale. The porters took care not to jostle the cart too close to the delicate boxes of olive oil brought in from Hispania, or to disturb the gourds of salted fish piled near the corner fountain. A spray of water hissed as it met hot stone, and the steady drip from the fountain spout provided a cool accompaniment to the click of cartwheels over the worn paving stones. At the foot of the Esquiline, the route narrowed. Here, the streets were not paved so regularly. Uneven stones and patches of packed earth forced the porters to slow their pace. They passed low, flat-roofed insulae, their walls crisscrossed by thick ropes bearing drying laundry of every color. Wooden balconies jutted out overhead, and from them fluttered the day's last garments, still dripping from earlier rinsing in private cisterns. A child leaned over a railing, curious about the bundles of cloth passing beneath her. She reached out to touch the coarse twine, her small fingertips brushing it before her mother, atop the balcony, called her back with a gentle scolding. Despite the increasing jostle of street traffic, traders hauling barrels of wine, a phalanx of toga-clad orators filing out of a morning hearing, the porters maintained their calm rhythm. They had learned long ago that haste only invited mishap, a snagged bundle, a tipped cart, a broken wheel. Instead, they moved as though in deliberate procession, each step measured, each adjustment of the load considered. When a laden mule cart approached from the opposite direction, its driver braced a foot against the iron rim of his wheel and leaned into the animal's flank, snarling to clear the path. The porters shuffled to one side, guided their own cart past with courteous obeisance, and nodded at the muleteer before continuing onward. By the time they reached the portico of Domitia Lucilla's villa, the sun had softened to a burnished orange. Columns of polished marble gleamed in that last light, and a hush fell, broken only by the soft creak of leather hinges as the villa's steward stepped forward to receive them. The porters unhitched the leather straps, lifted out each linen-wrapped bundle, and placed them upon a low wooden bench. The steward ran his fingers along the twine one last time, smiled appreciatively at the master fuller's seal on each wrap, and glanced up at the sky where the first star was beginning to glimmer. A brief nod, a counting of house staff to ensure all deliveries had arrived, and then the porters turned their cart once more toward the highway. Their shadows lengthened behind them as they set off toward the Sepelius of Lucius Septimius, their evening still young and each new stop a chance to witness the city's ever-shifting heartbeat. In the grand mosaic of Rome's daily life, these humble bundles of cloth, once sodden with toil and earthy mixtures, now crisp, bright, and fragrant with olive oil, were silent ambassadors. They carried the tactile proof of the Phalonica's skill into the hands of Rome's elite, to be unfolded and worn as garments of comfort, prestige, and quiet confidence. And with each careful turn of a wheel, each measured tightening of twine, the porters wove themselves into the larger tapestry of a city that thrived on the rhythm of labor, the precision of routine, and the promise of another dawn's unseen labors yet to come. The oil lamp's flame trembles as Ulpianus lifts the small wooden tray from the low bench where it has rested through the afternoon. A soft glimmer slides across the worn surface of the Phalonica's workroom, low stone walls, streaked with lime and clay, now calm and quiet after the day's ceaseless clatter of mallets and rushing water. The men who drove the fulling vats have gone, their leather sandals scooped clean and lined up by the door. Only the foreman remains, leaning over his table of boards and boxes. He taps the rim of the tray once, twice, to settle the coins, coppers, bronzes, and the occasional denarius, that clink and shift into small conical piles. A dull greenish gleam on the high edges of some low value as coins betrays their age. He widens his nostrils, catching the faint coppery scent and the lingering trace of resin from the lamp near his elbow. In this stillness, the quiet clatter of metal feels almost musical. With steady fingers, Ulpianus sorts the heavier denarii into one corner of the tray. Each silver coin, stamped with the stoic profile of the emperor, is worth 20 asses. He counts them one by one, unhurried, aloud, unus, duo, tres, the number hangs in the air. A slip of charcoal and wax on a small tablet at his side waits for the final tally. Across the stone floor, the work tables bear the faint remnants of earlier tasks, a few broken shards of modest pottery once used for chalk, the battered wooden mallet leaning against a support beam. Now, these tools rest in the peaceful hush. At this hour, when torchlight highlights every imperfection in the limestone walls, the foreman's world shrinks to the table before him, the coins he collects, and the careful marks he will soon inscribe. He sweeps the tray gently, sending the copper coin piles whispering toward him. He lifts a pail as, discarded at the edge, and double-checks its weight against an iron measure. The coin gives a light, confident ring when struck, telling him it is genuine. Satisfied, he sets it with its fellows. Another handful of small bronzes goes next, counted in groups of 10. He places a finger atop each group as he names, decim, pausing between strokes to ensure the piles remain distinct. Moments stretch. The lamplight sways. He recalls the day's work, from dawn's first unlocking of the doors to the final bundles loaded on the cart. Each order brought here has its price: charge for soaking, trampling, chalking, drying, oiling. Some garments, judged finer than others, added a premium. Purple-dyed garments were most lucrative, requiring extra earth and close inspection. He does not forget the wealthy matron whose silken stola took 3 times as long, nor the senator's toga whitened under the sun's blaze. Their patronage echoes now in these copper discs and bronze lumps. When he has counted the coppers, he reaches for the wax tablet. Its surface is a mild gray where fresh wax has settled into the shallow frame's carved edges. With the rounded end of a stylus, he traces a careful tally mark, a short, deliberate stroke, then another to cross it. One by one, the day's totals appear in straight columns. Near the top, a faded column shows yesterday's sum. The new figures are neatly aligned beside them. He murmurs the totals in Latin, quadrangenti sestertii. His voice is low and calm, a soft rhythm to match the scratching of the stylus. The wax yields with authority. The tiny sound of carved wax fills the chamber. He pauses to count the coins again, verifying no bruise of error. After a moment's reflection, he draws a small flourish, a loop to separate one category from the next. Beyond the soft glow of the lamp, shadows retreat toward the corners. The lingering smell of damp fabric, chalk dust, and spent smoke hangs in the air like a memory. Ulpianus feels the weight of ledgers past pressing on him, reminding him how easily a slip of a stylus can cost a fuller his standing with patrons. He taps the tablet with the stylus's pointed end, a gentle reminder of discipline. Next, distributing wages. He arrays small piles of bronze for 3 of his assistants, Marcellus, Lucilla, and Titus, each a careful portion of the coin chest. Their daily wage is modest, still, they have earned every as by slogging the vats and bearing the stench of the alkaline baths. He counts the pieces into 3 neat heaps, 10 for Marcellus, 8 for Lucilla, 12 for Titus. He watches each pile form, then marks the wax beside the wage column, X, 8, 12. A small flick of his finger erases mistakes, pressing the wax smooth, ready again for a fresh mark. Now for the chest. He lifts the iron-bound box from beneath the table. Its lid opens on squeaking hinges, revealing velvet pouches and coiled leather purses. The foreman takes a soft pouch and inverts the contents into the chest, hearing coins clatter against metal and leather. He arranges them so larger silver discs rest at the bottom, smaller coppers on top. Each pile settles into a small compartment carved into the box's interior, intended to keep denominations from mixing. When the last falls homeward, he closes the lid with a soft click and tucks its key into the sash of his tunic. For a moment, he leans back on his stool. The flicker of the lamp plays across his lined brow. He thinks of tomorrow's rising sun, of the water channels waiting to be summoned into motion, of the next amphory of aged urine drawn at the street corner. He thinks of the masters who trust him to deliver spotless togas, of clients who pay promptly, or sometimes, reluctantly. He allows himself a quiet breath and lifts the lamp higher, inspecting the chamber. All seems in order, no stray garments, no lumps of chalk uncollected. Beyond the door, the city's noise has fallen away into a distant murmur. Here inside, the foreman's routine draws to a close. He will soon extinguish the lamp, wind the heavy bolts across the door, and step into the night air. But before that, one last glance at the wax tablet, one last whisper of figures in his mind. He reads aloud, in a voice as soft as rustling linen, the final totals. Each number is an echo of labor completed, of sweat dried on rich cloth, of the subtle alchemy that turns soiled raiment bright again. Then he sets stylus and tablet aside. He tips the lamp until the flame curls against the shade and breathes out, snuffing it in one gentle motion. Darkness enfolds him. The coins lie safe in their chest. The ledger records his care. And tomorrow, once more, the Phalonica doors will swing wide, and the ancient cycle of cleansing and counting will begin anew. The heavy hush that settles over the Phalonica in the deep of night seems to carry its own weight, as though every stone block and wooden beam holds a memory of the day's toil. Titus moves slowly down the long row of worktables, his leather sandals whispering on the worn flagstones. Oil lamps, small clay dishes filled with perfumed oil, flicker low, their meager flames dancing against the rough plaster walls. He pauses at the first lamp, tilts the shallow bowl to free a drop of oil from the wick, then presses the ember gently to the rim. The light winks and dies, vanishing into the enveloping darkness. A soft clatter follows as he sets the lamp aside and moves on to the next. Room by room, basin by basin, he even snuffs out the lantern hanging near the exit, until the only sound is the faint drip of residual water, settling at last into silence. At the far end of the washing hall, Marcia fingers the coarse hemp rope that once tethered the great wooden paddle. She coils it neatly, ties the loop with a practiced twist, and hangs it from its peg. The stone vats, where yesterday's tunics and togas were confused, scraped and softened, have already been drained. But Marcia stoops to check the lead-lined gutters, brushing away a last fleck of fuller's earth that clings to the lip. She listens for any hollow echo beneath her fingertips, a sign that a fissure has formed. Satisfied, she covers the channel with a wooden plank, sealing off the chamber until the next morning's first stirrings. The rough grain of the plank seems warmer under her palm than the surrounding stone, a small comfort in the chill of the night. Together, Titus and Marcia return to the heavy double doors at the front of the Phalonica. Each door is a slab of oak, reinforced by iron bands that curve like oversized braids. While Marcia lowers the wrought iron bolt into its catch, Titus slides the thick bar through the matching slots. The echo of metal on wood is muted, as though the building longs to absorb the sound and keep it secret. A final latch is clicked into place. They tap the door with knuckles, 3 light knocks in a triangular pattern, the same signal they used at dawn, but in reverse, farewell rather than entrance, goodbye rather than greeting. It is a quiet ritual, but one that feels as vital as any prayer. Outside, the narrow street lies empty beneath a sky paler than the whitewashed walls of the Phalonica. A cool breeze drifts down from the distant hills, carrying with it scents of laurel and damp earth. The nearby fountain, abandoned since dusk, gurgles softly in the moonlight, its stone dragon's mouth half open. Marcia inhales deeply, savoring the faint sweetness of pressed olives from the evening market, mingled with the dry whisper of aged tufa dust. The air feels sharp against her lungs, sharpening her thoughts as well. In the hush, even the distant clang of a lone smith's hammer seems like thunder. They stand side by side, backs against the locked doors, and breathe in unison. This moment, suspended between the labors of one day and the promise of the next, carries its own significance. Titus runs a hand through damp curls, still scented faintly with the foam and brine of the last rinse. His shoulders, loosened by the steady rhythm of stomping vats and lifting buckets, relax into the night. He recalls the early hours, when lanterns shone against the indigo sky and the fullers pressed their feet into the murky baths of urine and clay. He feels the weight of the amphory, the sting of lime dust on his face, the soft pull of linen as it yielded under his fingers. A quiet pride swells in his chest. The garments of senators and merchants now hang clean and bright, awaiting proud processions in the Forum. To have played a part, however small, in restoring their radiance, this is a simple grace, and one he cherishes. Marcia's gaze drifts upward to the small niche above the doorframe, where 2 tiny oil lamps have burned all day for the household Laras, the protective spirits of the workshop. During the bustle of midday, she paused to pour a little oil into those lamps, an offering for steady hands and sound judgments. Now, in the final hush, she murmurs a soft chant of thanks, her words swallowed by the cool night. Even in silence, she feels the presence of those unseen guardians, as though the walls themselves are leaning in to listen. The Phalonica, with its centuries of stone and mortar, seems alive, a creature breathing gently in its slumber. Turning away from the building, Titus and Marcia step onto the wider thoroughfare that leads toward home. A solitary brazier flickers at the corner, its yellow flame haloed by curling smoke. Shadows play against the rough-hewn blocks of the city wall. The flicker light reveals a solitary figure, a night watchman pacing with a wooden cudgel. His cloak is pulled tight, and by the glint of metal at his side, one can tell he is no stranger to danger. As the two fullers pass, the watchman lifts a lantern in greeting and then resumes his steady march, as though to mark time against the swirl of the heavens. In that moment, the vastness of the city feels both protective and indifferent, a world that rests but never truly sleeps. Marcia folds her hands inside the sleeves of her woolen tunic and lifts her chin, as though sniffing for the faint perfume of her small garden at home. Tomorrow, she knows, she will emerge once more into oil lamp glow, ready to guide fresh water through the troughs, to sort the pile of soiled cloth that waits at dawn's first light. She will cart buckets of lime and chalk, she will skim away lint, she will test the softness of wool. A new cycle will begin, unending as the turn of the watermill's wheel. Yet for now, in the velvet dark, the world seems at rest, and she will carry this tranquility with her until sleep takes her. Titus says little as they continue, but his footsteps keep pace with Marcia's. He thinks of his small family back home, his wife, already asleep on her pallet, dreaming under the flicker of embers in the hearth. He thinks of his children, nestled in straw mats, dreaming too. Soon he will pass his threshold, slide the bolt home, and stand for a moment in the familiar gloom of his own courtyard, before yielding to the quiet rhythms of domestic life. The sound of his own breathing will replace the drip of the Pholonika's basins. He will count no coins tonight, consult no inventories, only the steady beating of his heart, echoing through his chest, until morning's call rouses him again. As the pair move farther from the Pholonika's door, the heavy stones behind them seem to absorb the footsteps, the murmurs, the faint sigh, preparing to wait once more for dawn. Yet somewhere in that closed chamber, in the hush of stone and shadow, remains the memory of water and warmth and flux. It is a place of transformation, where the soil becomes clean, the stained becomes white, the worn becomes new again. And though the building slumbers now, its promise endures, that in the first pale light of morning, its doors will swing open, and the cycle will begin anew. For in ancient Rome, as long as garments need cleansing and cloth needs brightening, the Pholonika's heartbeat will not still, and neither will the hands that tend its rhythm.